He came early. She pressed her apron against her mouth so hard her knuckles turned white. The refrigerator compressor hummed. The parking lot lights swept across the kitchen window. And Lauren Whitaker, who had fed half of Spokane for 20 years, sat beside a sack of potatoes on the floor and shook like a woman who had forgotten she was allowed to be afraid. Grant Mercer saw the fingerprints on her wrist before she could cover them. Then someone started pounding on the back door. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and drop a comment below telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Hit that subscribe button and follow along until the very last word. Now let's go back to where this all began. The rain had been falling on Spokane since noon, the kind of steady eastern Washington rain that doesn't announce itself, it just arrives and settles in like an uninvited guest who expects dinner. By 7 o'clock that Thursday evening, in October of 1998, the parking lot outside Black Pine Tavern was already crowded with pickup trucks, a few beat-up sedans, and the collection of motorcycles that had been parking in the far corner since 6:30. 11 of them tonight, plus Grant Mercer's. 12 motorcycles total. Dripping rain leaned over on their kickstands in a row that most people in Spokane recognized without needing to look twice. The Hells Angels patch was not something you forgot once you'd seen it. And Grant Mercer had been stopping at Black Pine Tavern for almost 4 years. The regulars knew his face. The staff knew his order. The new waitresses were always briefly terrified on their first night and usually got over it by the second, because the man who looked like he could pull a truck axle apart with his bare hands always said please and thank you and never once caused trouble inside these walls. Sandra Kowalski, who had been waitressing at Black Pine for 11 years, came out from behind the bar when she saw the motorcycles pulling in. She found the hostess, a 22-year-old named Deb, who was still getting comfortable with the Thursday night crowd, standing near the entrance looking uncertain. "It's fine," Sandra said. "They're regulars. Booth in the back, extra napkins on the table. Don't hover, and whatever you do, don't forget the hot sauce." "All of them?" Deb asked, watching 11 men in road-worn leather shaking rain off their jackets at the door. "Every single one of them," Sandra said. "Grant's the big one with the beard. He always gets the New York strip, medium rare, with the mashed potatoes and the house salad. He'll ask for Lori's dressing on the side." "Lori makes her own dressing?" "Lori makes everything. That's kind of the whole point of this place." The kitchen at Black Pine Tavern was not a large space. It was functional, slightly cramped during peak hours, organized with the stubborn efficiency of someone who had learned long ago that a disorganized kitchen was a kitchen that fell behind. Lori Whitaker had worked that grill for 9 years, and in 9 years she had developed the particular authority of a woman who understood exactly where every pan, every spatula, every bottle of spice belonged. Her kitchen ran like a clock. Regulars joked that you could set your watch by when Lori's apple pie came out of the oven on Friday afternoons. Tonight something was different. Sandra noticed it before she even pushed through the kitchen door to put in Grant's order. She almost didn't say anything. Lori was standing at the grill with her back to the door, and there was nothing obviously wrong. The grill was clean. The prep table was organized. 2 plates were already up waiting for table 6. But Sandra had worked beside this woman for over a decade, and she knew Lori's kitchen the way she knew her own living room. She knew what normal felt like in here. Tonight didn't feel normal. "Grant Mercer's in," Sandra said, posting the ticket. "Usual order." Lori nodded without turning around. "You okay?" Sandra asked. "I'm fine." 2 words. Flat. Efficient. The exact tone someone uses when they are not fine, but have decided that the work is more manageable than the conversation. Sandra looked at her for another moment, then let it go. The dining room was filling up. She had 4 other tables to check. For the next 40 minutes, Lori cooked. She moved through the routine with the mechanical precision of muscle memory, plates up, orders in, nothing wasted, nothing forgotten. She answered the few questions her line cook, a quiet 18-year-old named Pete, who mostly kept his head down, asked her. She refilled her water glass twice, without drinking from it. She was holding herself together the way a person does when falling apart is not an option they have available to them. And then Grant Mercer's steak came off the grill. Sandra picked up the plate, looked at it, and set it back down. She turned toward the grill. Lori turned. Sandra didn't have to say anything else. The steak was burned. Not ruined, not inedible, but clearly cooked past where it was supposed to stop. The edges charred dark in a way that Laurie Whitaker simply did not do. Not to any customer. Certainly not to Grant Mercer, who had been ordering the same steak from this kitchen for 4 years. For a moment, Laurie just stared at the plate. "I'll redo it," she said. I said I'll redo it." Her voice didn't rise. It just became very flat and very quiet, which Sandra had learned over the years was actually worse. She pulled a new cut from the cooler. She put it on the grill. She stood directly in front of it, with both hands braced against the edge of the prep table, and watched it cook, like she was afraid to look away. In the dining room, Grant Mercer sat at the back booth with his men, nursing his beer, not in a hurry. He had noticed Sandra come back from the kitchen without his plate, and he had let it go. Places got busy on rainy Thursday nights. He didn't make a thing out of small delays. What he did notice, about 10 minutes later, was the sound. It came from the kitchen, a clatter, followed immediately by a sharp, gasping intake of breath and the sound of something shattering against the floor. A tray, dropped by Deb, who had come into the kitchen for something and bumped it on the corner of the prep station. Grant looked up. Through the small rectangular window cut into the kitchen door, through the gap of space between people moving inside, he saw it. The burned steak had been his first signal. This was his second. The moment that tray hit the floor, Laurie Whitaker dropped into a half crouch and threw both hands over her head. Not the way someone reacts to a sudden loud sound, the brief flinch and recover that most people do. This was a full protective reflex. Both arms raised, head down, body curled forward. The movement of someone who had learned, at some point, that when things fell and shattered around them, what came next could be much worse. She recovered in under 2 seconds, stood up, smoothed her apron, told Deb in a completely controlled voice that it was fine. She'd take care of the mess. Would Deb please get the dustpan from under the sink? Grant watched all of it. He picked up his beer and finished it slowly. He didn't say anything to the men around him. Didn't need to. A couple of them had glanced toward the kitchen at the sound and looked back at their food without comment. Grant had known most of these men for years. They understood how he processed things, quietly and completely, and without drama until he was ready to decide what to do about them. He ate his steak when it came out perfectly cooked this time, exactly the way he liked it. He ate his salad. He ordered Laurie's apple pie when Sandra mentioned it was fresh. He paid the bill, over-tipped the way he usually did, and then told his men to head out without him. "I'm going to finish my coffee," he said. They knew not to ask questions. By 9:15, the dining room had thinned out. By 9:45, the last table had cashed out, and Sandra was wiping down the bar. Deb was collecting salt and pepper shakers to refill them. The television in the corner was running the 11 o'clock news early. The sound turned down low. Grant sat at the bar with his coffee cup and listened to the kitchen, sounds shifting from the controlled noise of active cooking to the slower, methodical work of cleaning down. The grill going cold, the industrial sink running, pans being stacked. He wasn't eavesdropping. He was just listening the way he had trained himself to listen after a lifetime of reading situations that other people missed. And underneath the compressor hum of the kitchen refrigerator, underneath the clank of metal on metal and the running water, he heard something that stopped him completely cold. Someone crying, not loud crying, not the kind of crying that fills a room. The opposite. The kind of crying that is done with tremendous effort to make as little sound as possible, muffled, contained, bitten down, the kind that costs more physical energy than screaming, because every sound has to be caught before it escapes. He had heard that particular sound only a handful of times in his life, and every single time it had meant the same thing. Someone was working very, very hard to make sure nobody knew they were falling apart. Grant set down his coffee cup. He walked to the kitchen door. He pushed it open slowly. The kitchen lights were still on. Pete had already gone home. Deb had never been in the back. It was just Lori, and she was sitting on the floor in the gap between the prep station and the large sack of potatoes that was waiting to be peeled tomorrow morning. Her apron pressed against her mouth with both hands, her shoulders shaking with the effort of keeping herself quiet. She heard the door and looked up. For one full second, neither of them moved. Then she was on her feet. The apron dropped. Her expression reset with the speed of someone who had been doing this for a very long time, the rapid reconstruction of the face that said, "Everything is fine. I am fine. There is nothing here worth looking at." "Kitchen's closed," she said. Her voice was almost steady. Grant didn't move from the doorway. He stood there with his hands loose at his sides and looked at her, the way he looked at everything that mattered directly, without pretending not to see what he was seeing. "I know," he said. "Bar's open for another hour if you need something." "I don't need anything." She reached for a rag on the counter and started wiping a surface that was already clean. Her hands were moving just to have something to do with them. Her back was partly to him, and Grant's eyes tracked down to her left wrist, where the sleeve of her uniform had shifted slightly when she'd reached for the rag. He could see the fingerprints, not bruises yet. They would be bruises by morning. But the marks of fingers, 4 distinct pressure points along the inside of the wrist and one on the outside, where a thumb had pressed, were clear to anyone who knew what they were looking at. Grant knew what they were looking at. "Laurie," he said. She stopped wiping. She didn't turn around. "Go back out front. Please," she said. "I need to finish in here." "Those marks on your wrist," he said. Every muscle in her back went rigid. "I bumped it on the edge of the lorry." The way he said her name was not loud. It was not demanding. It was the way you say someone's name when you are asking them to stop carrying something alone for just one more minute. When you are telling them that whatever they are about to say to protect themselves, you already know and they don't have to say it. She was quiet for a very long time. The refrigerator compressor clicked on and hummed. When she finally turned around, her eyes were red and her jaw was set in the expression of a woman who had decided years ago that needing help was a luxury she couldn't afford. "It's nothing," she said. "I handled it." "You're hiding in your own kitchen," Grant said. "At 9:30 at night. I said I handled it." "How long has this been going on?" She shook her head and looked away. Her hands found the edge of the prep counter and gripped it. "You don't need to worry about this." "How long, Laurie?" The question just sat there in the kitchen between them. Not pushing, not accusing, just asking, the way a question asks when the person behind it already understands that the answer is going to be painful and is asking anyway, because the answer matters more than the comfort of not knowing. She opened her mouth, closed it, pressed her lips together. "Years," she finally said. So quietly, he almost didn't hear it over the compressor. Grant did not react. He did not stiffen or clench his jaw or do any of the things men did when they heard something that made them want to solve a problem with their hands. He just absorbed it. Let it settle. Let her see that the word had landed and that he was still standing exactly where he had been standing before she said it. "Okay," he said. That was all he said. "Okay." As if she had told him something that was painful but manageable. As if the information was now part of the situation and they could deal with it. She stared at him. "Okay," he repeated. "You don't have to explain anything right now. You don't have to explain anything at all if you don't want to. I'm just going to stand here for a minute. That's you can't just... I'm going to stand here for a minute," he said again. Calm, steady, like a wall that had no interest in going anywhere. Something in Laurie's face broke open slightly, just for a second, and then she caught it and held it together again. She turned back toward the sink and ran the water and didn't say anything. Grant stood in the kitchen doorway. He had been standing there for perhaps 3 minutes when the lights changed. Headlights, coming across the kitchen window from the direction of the back parking lot. He saw Laurie's hands go still on the edge of the sink. She didn't move, didn't turn around, just went completely, absolutely still, the way prey animals go still, not from calm, but from the instinct that says if you stop moving, whatever is coming might not find you. Grant turned toward the window. Through the glass, in the rain, he could see the shape of a truck. A working truck, heavy duty, with a light bar across the roof. He read the lettering on the door panel in the glow of the parking lot light. Whitaker Recovery and Towing. He looked back at Lori. She hadn't moved. He came early, she said. Her voice was barely a sound. She was already starting to untie her apron. The movements of someone who had done this particular thing before the rapid, practiced preparation for an encounter she did not want but had learned to manage. Get yourself collected. Get your story straight. Get to the door before he has to knock twice, because if he has to knock twice, he's already angrier when you open it. Grant crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and reached the back door just as the pounding started on the other side of it. 3 loud hits. Not a knock. A demand. Grant threw the deadbolt. Lori went rigid. No, don't do that. If he thinks Hey. Grant turned to face her, and he did something that she did not expect at all. He stepped back. Both hands went out to his sides, palms open and visible. He put distance between himself and her. He made himself smaller in the way that a large man can make himself smaller when he understands that the most important thing right now is not his size, but his intentions. I'm not keeping you in here, he said. I'm keeping him out. She stared at him. Her hands were shaking. There's a difference, he said. You can open that door anytime you want. That's your door. I'm not touching it. Another round of pounding. Harder. Lori! I know you're in there. Sandra's car is still in the lot. She flinched at the sound of his voice. The full body flinch of someone who has been trained by long experience to associate that particular sound with particular consequences. Grant watched her. He kept his voice level, quiet. He spoke the way you speak in a room where the wrong tone could shatter something that had taken years to build. Lori, he said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually answer me. Because right now I don't have enough information to help you, and I want to help you. She was breathing in short, shallow pulls. Her eyes kept going to the door. Who hurt you? She looked at him. The question landed in the kitchen and sat there like something physical. Outside, the voice came again. Lauren, open this door right now or so help me. My husband, Lori said. The words came out barely above a whisper. She looked almost surprised to hear herself say them. Like the sentence had been sitting behind her teeth for so long that it had started to feel like part of her. And now it was out in the room, and it couldn't be taken back, and she wasn't sure yet whether that was a catastrophe or a relief. Grant held very still. Okay, he said. Okay, I hear you. He's going to stand out there in the rain, Grant said. That's what he's going to do right now. Another round of pounding on the door, and then the voice changed. Dropped lower. Got calmer in that particular way that is sometimes more frightening than shouting because it means the person outside has decided that being loud isn't working and they're shifting strategies. Lori, baby, come on. Open the door. I just closed her eyes. That's how it always starts, she said. The talk. Grant looked at her steadily. How long before he gives up and leaves? She opened her eyes. He doesn't give up. How long before he tries the front? 10 minutes. Maybe less if he figures out who's in here with me. Does he know my truck? She shook her head. He knows your bikes. He's complained about you before. Grant processed that. He nodded once, slowly. Tell me about the ledger. She blinked. What? The ledger. The books you used to keep for his company. You copied pages from it. You told somebody, or you were about to tell somebody, and that's when things got worse. I'm right, aren't I? The color drained from her face in a way that answered the question before she said a word. How did you? Because scared people and dangerous people are both things I know how to read, he said. And what I'm reading right now is that you didn't just make him angry. You found something, and he knows you found it. She sat down on the nearest stool, not because she chose to, but because her legs made the decision for her. I wasn't trying to. She stopped, pressed her hands flat against the tops of her thighs. I used to do his books. For years. I thought I was helping. I thought, if I knew everything about the business, I thought it would make me useful. Useful felt safer than not useful. Grant nodded. He understood exactly what she was describing. Even though she was talking about a situation he'd never personally been in. And you found discrepancies, he said. I found money that didn't go anywhere, she said. Cash payments. Vehicles on the inventory that disappeared from the inventory. Towing tickets that didn't match any insurance claim or police record. She paused. I kept my mouth shut for over a year. I thought if I pretended I hadn't seen it, it would be fine. But you copied the pages. She looked at him. I copied them because I got scared. Not about what he was doing to the business. About what he would do to me if he ever decided She stopped again. The copies were insurance, I thought. He found out you made copies. He didn't find the copies, she said. He found out pages were missing from the ledger. He doesn't know what I did with them. He just knows something is gone that shouldn't be gone. And since he figured that out, her voice dropped. He's been different. More dangerous, Grant said. Yes. Outside, the back door had gone quiet, which was not the same as Wade having left. Grant moved to the window, staying to the side, and looked out into the wet parking lot. The tow truck was still there. Wade Whitaker was not standing at the back door anymore. He had moved around the side of the building, going to the front. He's going around, Grant said. We've got about 2 minutes. He turned back to Lori. Where are the copies? Not here. Safe place? She hesitated, then nodded. Good, he said. Keep them there. Don't tell me where they are. Don't tell anyone where they are unless you're ready to hand them to someone who can do something with them. Do you understand me? I understand you, she said slowly. But I don't. Why are you? She stopped. She looked at him with something that was not quite trust yet and not quite suspicion, but something in between that people develop when they have been given very good reasons not to believe in help. Why are you doing this? Grant considered the question seriously. Because you burned my steak, he said. She stared at him. You have never once burned my steak in 4 years, he said. And because you flinched at a drop tray like somebody who has spent a long time expecting bad things to come out of nowhere. And because he paused, because somebody should have asked you that question a long time ago. And nobody did. From the front of the building, they both heard the sound of the main entrance door handle being tried. Sandra's voice, from the bar, sharp and carrying, were closed. And then Wade's voice, smooth and reasonable, the way it got when he was being reasonable for an audience. Just looking for my wife, ma'am. She forgot to check in, and I got worried. Lori's hands tightened in her lap. He does that, she said quietly. He sounds like the worried husband. He's very good at sounding like the worried husband. I know, Grant said. Men like that usually are. He moved toward the kitchen door that led into the main dining room. Wait, Lori started. I'm going to go sit at the bar, Grant said. In plain sight. In public. I'm not going to touch him or threaten him or give him a single thing he can use against you. I'm just going to sit at the bar. He looked back at her. You come out when you're ready, or you stay in here until he leaves. Either way, you're not alone in this building. He pushed through the kitchen door. Lori sat in the kitchen and listened. She heard Grant's voice saying something to Sandra, easy and casual, the particular sound of a man who was choosing to be relaxed as an act of deliberate control. She heard Sandra say something back. She heard Wade's voice from the front entrance, still working the reasonable angle, asking politely, explaining that he'd just come to give his wife a ride home. She heard Grant say, she mentioned she had some closing work to finish. I'm sure she'll be out shortly. No aggression, no confrontation, just the calm, factual statement of a man who was sitting at a bar where he had every right to be sitting, doing absolutely nothing that anyone could object to. Wade's voice shifted, a fraction. The reasonable husband sliding slightly towards something else and then catching himself. I didn't realize anyone was still here, Wade said. Do I know you? I eat here every few weeks, Grant said. Best steak in Spokane. A pause. I'm Wade Whitaker, Wade said. Lori's my wife. Grant Mercer, Grant said. The name landed. It always landed. Spokane was not a big enough city for Grant Mercer's name to go unrecognized by someone who ran a towing operation and had to deal with law enforcement and local business on a regular basis. Wade knew the name. He would know exactly what it meant. I was just finishing my coffee. Another pause. Longer this time. Lori, in the kitchen, heard the quality of that pause and understood it completely. She had seen Wade make that calculation before the rapid, invisible arithmetic of a man deciding whether the advantage of pushing was worth the cost of the resistance he'd meet. Grant Mercer was not someone you pushed. Everyone in Spokane who had ever needed to know that knew it. Well, Wade said, and his voice had gone perfectly level. Tell her I'll be outside. Lori heard the front door open and close. She sat in the kitchen for a moment longer. Then she got up, untied her apron, hung it on its hook, and smoothed her hair back from her face. She put her uniform jacket on over her uniform shirt, covering her wrists. She picked up her bag from beneath the counter where she kept it. She pushed through the kitchen door. Grant was at the bar. Sandra was pretending to count something behind it. Both of them looked up when Laurie came out. Neither of them said anything about the redness around her eyes or the careful way she was holding herself. I'm going to lock up the kitchen, Laurie said, to Sandra as normally as she could manage. I already got it, Sandra said. Laurie nodded. She looked at Grant. He was still holding his coffee cup. He didn't say anything, didn't push, didn't offer anything she hadn't asked for. He's waiting outside, she said. I know, Grant said. He's not going to do anything in the parking lot. Too many people can see. I know that too. I'm going to go out and I'm going to get in his truck and I'm going to go home, she said. And then, quieter, and tomorrow I'm going to come to work and cook. Grant looked at her for a moment. Okay, he said. She stopped. I'm not ready to, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm not ready to. Nobody is asking you to be ready for anything tonight, he said. Tonight you just do what you need to do to get through tonight. That's all. She stood there. Those pages, Grant said. Quiet enough that only she could hear it. Keep them safe. Don't let him find them. And if there comes a day when you decide you're ready to do something with them, I know some people. She looked at him. She was a woman who had spent years learning that offers of help came with prices attached. The measuring look on her face said she was trying to find the price on this one. What kind of people, she said. Lawyers, he said. Investigators. A woman named Marlene, who runs a resource center on 4th Street and has spent 23 years helping women figure out their next step. He put down his coffee cup. No agenda attached to it. You ask when you're ready. Or you never ask. Either way, tonight I'm just a man who finished his coffee. Lori looked at him for a long moment. Your steak was overcooked, she said. It was a little charred on one edge, he said. Still the best steak in the city. She picked up her bag. She walked to the front door. She stopped with her hand on the handle. She didn't turn around. Thank you, she said, for locking the door. The lock was already there, Grant said. I just turned it. She pushed through the door and walked out into the rain. Grant sat at the bar and listened to the sound of a truck engine turning over, pulling out of the parking lot, heading down the highway toward a house he'd never seen but could picture precisely. Sandra appeared from behind the bar and refilled his coffee without being asked. She okay? Sandra said. Grant wrapped his hands around the fresh cup. Outside, the rain had not let up. Not yet, he said. Sandra nodded. She went back to her side of the bar. The television murmured. The parking lot lights threw long, wet reflections across the window. But she's going to be, he said. He said it to the window. To the rain. To the empty parking lot where 11 motorcycles had already gone home and left one man alone at a bar with a cup of coffee and the very clear, very settled understanding that tomorrow morning, some things were going to need to change. He finished his coffee. He put money on the bar enough to cover his meal twice over, the way he usually did, because Lori had been undercharging him for years, and he had never once found the right moment to mention it. He put on his jacket. He walked to the door and stood there for a moment, looking out at the wet highway, at the truck stop across the road, at the distant lights of Spokane glowing orange and wet against the sky. Then he took out his phone, the brick of a Nokia, that had replaced the pager 2 years ago and scrolled to a number. It rang 3 times. "Marlene," he said when the line connected. "It's Grant. I know it's late. I need to talk to you about something. It's important." He listened. "Yeah, tomorrow's fine. First thing in the morning." He paused. "Her name is Lori Whitaker. She's been working at Black Pine Tavern for 9 years. She's in a situation, and she's going to need help when she's ready to ask for it." He listened again. "No, she doesn't know I'm calling. That's the point. I just want to make sure the resource is there. She'll find it when she's ready." He hung up. He stepped out into the rain. He stood beside his motorcycle for a moment, looking back at the closed front door, all Black Pine Tavern, at the dark kitchen window, at the sign above the door that had been swinging slightly in the wind for as long as he could remember. Then he swung his leg over the bike, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot. He drove the long way back through Spokane, past the towing yard on Industrial Way, past the dispatch office with the Whitaker Recovery and Towing sign lit up in the window, past the ordinary surface of a business that looked exactly like what it claimed to be. He drove slowly. He read everything. He filed it away. And by the time he reached home that night, Grant Mercer had made the kind of decision that a man like him made carefully and rarely, and then held absolutely without wavering. He was not going to look away from this. He was going to pay attention. He was going to be patient. And he was going to be there when Lori Whitaker was finally ready to ask. Grant Mercer did not sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table with a cup of cold before he touched it and turned over everything Lori had said in that kitchen, the years she'd used in one flat, exhausted word, the way her body had reacted to the sound of the tray hitting the floor, the marks on her wrist that were already bruising by the time she walked out into the rain. He had seen a lot of things in his life. He had sat across from men who lied with complete fluency and men who told the truth at great personal cost. He knew the difference between someone performing distress and someone trying desperately to contain it so the world didn't see how bad it had gotten. Lori Whitaker had not been performing anything. She had been surviving. The way people survive when survival has become so routine that they've stopped recognizing it as anything remarkable. Just another Thursday. Just another burned steak. Just another locked kitchen door. He was on the phone with Marlene Shaw before 7 the next morning. Marlene ran the Spokane Women's Advocacy Center out of a converted office on 4th Street, and she had been doing it for 23 years with the particular brand of practical, unsentimental competence that comes from spending 2 decades watching systems fail people, deciding to build better systems yourself. She was not a warm woman in the way that people usually meant warm. She was useful, which Grant had always found considerably more valuable. "Tell me what you know," she said when he called. He told her everything Lori had said, the ledger, the copied pages, the way Wade's behavior had escalated since he'd discovered something was missing, the financial irregularities Lori had described, vehicles disappearing from inventories, cash payments that never appeared in official records, towing tickets without corresponding police or insurance documentation. Marlene was quiet for a moment after he finished. "She copied ledger pages from her own husband's company," Marlene said. "Yes, and she's been sitting on them for what sounds like over a year, because she's afraid of what happens if she uses them and it doesn't work," Marlene said. Not a question. The tone of a woman who had heard this particular calculation many times before and understood it completely. "She knows what she has. She's not sure she can survive the attempt." "That's what it sounded like," Grant said. "Is she going to call me? I don't know. Maybe not soon." He paused. "I want to make sure the line's there when she's ready." "The line is always there," Marlene said. "That's not the problem. The problem is that women in her situation often need to reach a specific breaking point before they can use it. You can't push that timeline." Another pause. "What are you planning to do in the meantime?" Grant had already decided that by 3 in the morning. "Nothing that gives him an excuse," he said. "We're just going to be visible." Marlene made a sound that was not quite a laugh. 12 Hells Angels as a visibility strategy. 11, Grant said. "Plus me. God help Spokane." Marlene said. But she said it in a way that meant she understood exactly what he was doing and thought it was probably the right call. Grant, if what she's describing about the financial operation is accurate, this is bigger than a domestic situation. You understand that. I understand that. She may be a material witness to crimes that have nothing to do with what he's done to her personally. If that's the case, her safety becomes a law enforcement concern, not just an advocacy concern. I know, he said. I've got to call into someone at the DA's office. Just preliminary. Nothing with her name attached. Marlene was quiet again. You've been busy for someone who supposedly just finished his coffee last night. I'm a light sleeper, Grant said. He arrived at Black Pine Tavern at 11:30 that Friday morning, 3.5 hours before Lori's shift started. He parked his bike in the far corner of the lot and went inside and ordered coffee and the lunch special and ate it at the bar without making anything into a production. Sandra watched him from behind the bar with the expression of a woman who was working something out. She called in this morning, Sandra said, refilling his cup. Grant looked up. Said she'd be in for her shift, Sandra added quickly. Just called to check in. She sounded like Lori, which I'm choosing to take as a good sign. It is a good sign, Grant said. Is she in trouble? Grant considered the question. He had a long-standing policy about how much information to share with people who were adjacent to a situation but not inside it. Too much information made people behave differently, and when people behave differently around someone like Wade Whitaker, Wade noticed. She's dealing with something, Grant said. The best thing you can do right now is keep acting exactly like you always act. Sandra studied him. She was a sharp woman, and she had clearly already formed her own conclusions about last night's events. And if he comes in, Grant said, be normal, be friendly. Don't let on that anything is different. Can you do that? I've been waitressing for 11 years, Sandra said, with the quiet dignity of a woman who had navigated approximately 10,000 uncomfortable situations with a smile and a coffee refill. I can be normal in my sleep. Good, Grant said. Lori arrived at 3:55, 5 minutes before her shift. Her hair was in its usual bun. Her uniform was pressed. Her face was composed in the careful, practiced way of someone who spent the night deciding how to carry themselves through the morning. The marks on her wrist were covered by her sleeve, and she had put on enough makeup to address the redness under her eyes without making it look like she'd tried. She walked through the front door, nodded to Sandra, and stopped when she saw Grant at the bar. A complicated series of things happened in her expression over the course of about 2 seconds. Surprise, a flicker of something that might have been relief and then immediately retreated. Then the steady, measured look of a woman deciding how to respond to something she hadn't expected. You're here early, she said. Coffee's good, he said. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she picked up her bag and went to the kitchen. Grant finished his coffee and left. He drove around for an hour, made 2 phone calls, stopped at a hardware store, and was back in the Black Pine parking lot by 5:15. This time he was not alone. 3 of his riders were already there when he pulled in big men on loud bikes, parked at angles that gave them clear sight lines to both the main entrance and the side lot. They didn't go inside. They didn't make a show of anything. They just sat with their bikes in the parking lot, talking among themselves, visible to anyone who happened to look. By 6, there were 5. By 7, 8. By the time the dinner rush was fully underway, 12 motorcycles were parked in the lot of Black Pine Tavern on a Friday night, and the men who owned them were distributed between the parking lot, the bar, and 2 of the back booths. Nobody said anything dramatic. Nobody put on a performance. They ordered food and drinks, tipped well, and were unfailingly polite to the staff the way Grant had always required of them. But they were there, all of them, on a Friday night when they had other places they could have been. Lori came out of the kitchen once, around 7:30, to handle a situation where a ticket had gotten confused. She looked across the dining room, saw the boots and leather jackets filling half the available seating, and stopped moving for just a moment. Her eyes found Grant at the bar. He wasn't looking at her. He was talking to the man next to him about something that had nothing to do with her. She went back to the kitchen, but something in the way she carried herself, that's when she walked back through that door, was slightly different than the way she'd walked out of it. Half an inch taller. The set of her shoulders just slightly less braced. Not safe, not fixed, but less alone. That was Saturday. By Sunday, the word had started moving through Spokane in the way that words move through small cities, not announced, not advertised, but whispered between people who had noticed something and were trying to make sense of it. Wade Whitaker had noticed the motorcycles. Several of his business contacts had mentioned seeing them. A man who ran a dispatch service 3 blocks from Whitaker Recovery in Towing called Wade on Sunday afternoon to ask if everything was all right over at Black Pine because he'd heard Grant Mercer's people had been parking there 2 nights running. Wade didn't answer that question directly. He thanked the man for calling and hung up. Then he called Travis Boone. Travis was his business partner, the man who managed the regional impound yard and handled the parts of the operation that didn't appear in any official records. They had built something together over the past 6 years that looked, from the outside, exactly like a legitimate towing and recovery business. The inside was considerably more complex. Travis had always been the more cautious of the two, the one who thought 3 steps ahead, who moved money carefully, who made sure the paperwork always had a plausible explanation. Where Wade operated on confidence and intimidation, Travis operated on calculation. Mercer, Wade said, when Travis picked up a pause. I heard. You heard already. This city isn't as big as people think, Travis said. What did you do? I didn't do anything. Another pause. Longer this time. Wade. She called someone, Wade said. Or she's about to. I don't know who. I don't know what she said. She doesn't know anything concrete, Travis said. She copied some pages from an old ledger. That's bookkeeping confusion, not evidence. If she goes to anyone with that, we explain it as a filing error, and she looks like a disgruntled wife trying to cause problems during a marital dispute. It's not a problem unless... He stopped. Unless what? Unless she has access to something I don't know about, Travis said. You need to think hard about whether there is anything else she could have seen. Anything you didn't tell me about. Wade was quiet. Wade, Travis said, is there anything else? There's one shipment, Wade said, from March. The Kenworth that came through from the impound auction in Coeur d'Alene. The paperwork on that one has a name on it that shouldn't be there. The silence on Travis's end had a different quality now. The quality of a careful man recalculating risk. Does she know about that shipment? She shouldn't. That's not the same as no. She shouldn't, Wade repeated. Travis said nothing for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was very measured, the way it got when he was managing something he found alarming but didn't want to show. Get the situation with Mercer under control without making it worse. Do not push her right now. Do you understand me? Let this settle. The last thing we need is her going to someone official because she's scared. Scared people do unpredictable things. Wade hung up. He sat for a while. Then, because he was a man who had spent his entire life believing that the best response to a problem was to eliminate the thing causing it, he started thinking about how to make Lori look like the problem. It took 3 days. On Wednesday morning, a rumor began circulating through the loose network of Spokane small business owners, towing industry contacts, and local regulars who drank at the kind of places that Wade Whitaker frequented. The rumor was efficient and targeted and had the particular internal logic of a lie constructed by someone who knew his audience. Lori Whitaker was unstable. She had been skimming money from the family business for years, siphoning small amounts from cash transactions, falsifying expense records. When her husband finally confronted her about the discrepancies, she had become erratic and started making accusations. She was now apparently involved with the biker who'd been hanging around Black Pine Tavern, which was why his people had been showing up there all week. The rumor moved fast. By Thursday, Sandra had heard 3 versions of it from 3 different people. She went directly to Lori. Lori was at the prep counter when Sandra came into the kitchen and closed the door behind her. Sandra did not ease into it. She put both hands on the prep counter, looked Lori in the eyes, and said, "He's telling people you stole from him." Lori's hands went still on the cutting board. "He's telling people you're having an affair with Grant Mercer," Sandra continued. "And that you're unstable." That's the word he's using. Unstable. Lori set down the knife she was holding. She set it down very deliberately, with the care of someone making sure their hands do something constructive instead of something they'll regret. "How many people?" she said. "Half the Thursday lunch crowd," Sandra said. "And someone called the bar this morning. Ask me directly if it was true that Lori Whitaker was sleeping with a Hells Angels boss while she was still legally married." "What did you say?" "I said that Lori Whitaker's personal life was her own business and that her apple pie was the best in Spokane, and they should come, try a slice before they repeated anything they hadn't verified themselves." Sandra paused. "But Lori, people talk, and Wade talks loud." Lori was quiet for a long moment. She picked up the knife again, put it down again. She pressed both palms flat on the prep counter and looked at the wall. "He's doing it on purpose," she said. Finally. Not with surprise, she had always known he was capable of this, but with the particular exhausted clarity of watching a plan you recognized unfold exactly the way you predicted it would. "He wants people to think I'm the problem. If I'm the problem, then anything I say about him gets filtered through that." "Can I ask you something?" Sandra said. Lori looked at her. "Did you steal from him?" "No," Lori said. "Did you find something in his books that wasn't right?" A pause. Long enough that it was its own kind of answer. "Sandra, because if you did," Sandra said, "then what he's doing right now isn't just a man defending his reputation. It's a man shutting down a witness." She held Lori's gaze. "I've been watching you for 9 years. I know what you look like when you're hiding something because you're ashamed of it. That's not what this is." Lori looked at her for a long moment. "No," she said quietly. "That's not what this is." Sandra nodded. "Okay then." She picked up her order pad and went back to the dining room. Lori stood at the prep counter for another minute. Then she picked up the phone on the kitchen wall and dialed a number she had found in a Spokane community directory 3 weeks ago and memorized without writing down because she hadn't been able to risk writing it down. It rang twice. "Spokane Women's Advocacy Center. This is Marlene. My name is Lori Whitaker," Lori said. Her voice was steady. "I think I might need some help. I'm not sure I'm ready to do anything yet. But I think I need to talk to someone who understands what I'm dealing with." "You called the right place," Marlene said. "Tell me whatever you're comfortable telling me today. We can go at whatever pace you need," Lori told her. Not everything, not yet. But more than she had told anyone except Grant, and she told it to a woman she had never met, over a kitchen phone in the middle of a Thursday afternoon, while the lunch crowd murmured on the other side of the door and the grill waited for her. And the rumor that waited worked its way through the city like water finding its level. When she finished, Marlene asked one question. "Are you safe where you're sleeping right now?" Lori considered how to answer that honestly. He hasn't been physical in a while. He's been more careful since." She stopped. "Since he realized you might have documentation," Marlene said. "Yes. He's smarter than he seems then," Marlene said. It was not a compliment. "He's always been smarter than he seems," Lori said. "That's part of how this has worked for so long. All right. I want you to do one thing for me before we talk again. I want you to find a moment, very soon, to move those documents somewhere he has absolutely no access to. Not a car, not a workplace locker, not anywhere he has ever been or that he might guess." A pause. "Do you have someone outside of Spokane you trust completely?" Lori thought for a moment. "My sister, she's in Pullman. Call her tonight," Marlene said. "Don't explain everything. Just ask her to hold on to something for you." After she hung up, Lori stood in the kitchen for a long moment. The grill needed attention. 3 tickets were up. Pete was looking at her from across the kitchen with the careful, avoidant gaze of an 18-year-old who had figured out that something was going on and had decided the most respectful response was to pretend he hadn't. She picked up the tickets. She went back to work. That evening, when Grant came in for dinner, he had been coming Every day this week, which they had not discussed, and which Lori had chosen not to address directly, she came out of the kitchen at the end of her shift and sat down at the bar, 2 stools down from him. Sandra placed a cup of coffee in front of her without being asked and found somewhere else to be. He's spreading rumors, Lori said. I know, Grant said. I heard them this morning. She looked at him sideways. And in nothing, Grant said. That's his strategy. He wants you looking unstable, me looking predatory, and the whole thing looking like a domestic dispute between 2 unreliable parties instead of what it actually is. Which is what, she said, not testing him, genuinely asking, as if she needed to hear someone else name it clearly. A woman who discovered evidence of criminal activity, Grant said, who is now being silenced by the man who committed it. He said it simply, without drama, the way you state a fact. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. And he filed a complaint, Grant added, against me. Harassment and intimidation. She turned to look at him directly. What? Filed it this morning, Grant said. Claims my people have been parking outside his wife's workplace in a threatening manner designed to intimidate him. It's exactly what I expected him to do, Grant said. It's smart, actually. If I react, if any of my people so much as look at him the wrong way, the story becomes about us. The Hells Angels boss intimidating a local businessman. It buries everything else. So what do? Grant picked up his coffee cup and set it down again. When he did it, the gesture had the quality of a decision being confirmed, rather than a habit being repeated. Nothing, he said. We do exactly nothing that he expects us to do. We don't threaten him. We don't approach him. We don't give him the punch he's waiting for. He paused. Because that complaint tells me he's scared. A confident man doesn't file harassment reports. He confronts. The complaint means he's already recalculating. She absorbed that. Grant, she said. She said his name in a way that had weight to it, like she had been carrying the word around all day and had finally decided to put it down. He's not going to stop. I know, he's going to keep escalating. If the rumors don't work, he'll try something else. He always tries something else. I know that too. And at some point, she stopped. She turned the coffee cup in her hands. At some point, the only way this ends is if I use what I have. The bar was quiet around them. Sandra was at the far end, technically out of earshot. Outside, the parking lot held 4 motorcycles and the sound of a light November rain starting against the windows. Grant looked at her. He waited. I called Marlene today, Lori said. Something shifted very slightly in Grant's expression. Not surprise. Something quieter than surprise. The particular stillness of a man who had been hoping for a specific thing and was now hearing that it had happened. Good, he said. She wants me to move the documents. She's right. I'm going to call my sister tonight. He nodded. And then Lori stopped. She pressed her lips together. She was working up to something, and he could see it, and he did not rush it. And then I think I need to talk to someone official. A lawyer. Someone who can tell me what I have actually means. Whether it's enough. Her voice dropped slightly. Whether there's a version of this where I come out the other side. Grant turned on his stool and looked at her directly. There is, he said. She met his eyes. You can't know that. No, he said. But I know what you have is real. And I know that Wade filed that harassment complaint this morning, which means he's afraid you're about to do exactly what you're describing. And scared men make mistakes. He paused. Lori, he's already making them. She looked at him for a long time. The expression on her face was not hope. Exactly, hope was something you had when the outcome was possible. This was something more specific. The look of a woman who had lived for so long inside the belief that nothing could change, that the first evidence it might change was almost too large to process. What kind of mistakes, she said. He pushed too fast, Grant said. The rumors, he started them too quickly. Before he had a clear picture of what you'd said and to who. That tells me he's panicking. And the complaint, that's a public record now. His name is on a document that describes this situation from his perspective. If that perspective turns out to be false, and it will, it becomes part of the official story. She thought about that. He also, Grant continued, called your workplace yesterday afternoon. She went very still. He called here? He called the bar, Grant said. Asked Sandra if you'd been spending time with any of the bikers outside of work hours. Lori stared at him. Sandra didn't tell me that. Sandra told me this morning, Grant said. She didn't tell you because she didn't want to add to what you were already carrying. But it matters because it means he's monitoring you through people he thinks are neutral, which means he's not as certain of the situation as he wants you to believe. She was quiet for a moment, processing. He's watching me through Sandra, she said, slowly. He's trying to, Grant said. Sandra told him you were a good employee who showed up on time and made excellent pie. She didn't tell him anything else. Something moved across Lori's face. Gratitude, and underneath it, something sharper, the particular anger of a woman realizing the full scope of how far the monitoring had reached. Not just the tracking, not just the financial control, but the reaching into spaces she had considered neutral, trying to colonize them. He's been watching me through everyone, she said. For years, probably, Grant said, my coworkers, my customers. I had a friend, Maria, who I stopped seeing about 3 years ago because Wade said she was a bad influence. I thought it was just him being controlling. But if he was, she stopped. Her hands had tightened around the coffee cup. He mapped my entire world, every person in it. And then he made himself the only person I trusted. That's how it works, Grant said. Quiet, factual, not minimizing. She set the coffee cup down very precisely. I want to talk to that lawyer, she said. Tomorrow, if possible. I'll make a call tonight, Grant said. She nodded. She stood up from the bar stool and picked up her jacket. Grant, she said. He looked up. The harassment complaint he filed, she said. Is that going to cause you a problem? Legally. He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, rather than dismissing it. Probably not. We haven't done anything wrong, and the complaint doesn't allege anything specific. But it's on record, I'm sorry, she said. For pulling you into Lori, the way he said. It stopped her. Not sharp, just direct. You didn't pull me into anything. I walked through that kitchen door myself. A pause, and I'd walk through it again. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she put on her jacket and walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the handle, and for a second, Grant thought she might say something else. Instead, she just stood there, and he understood that what she was doing was something simple and important. She was letting herself feel the weight of what had shifted in the last 4 days without immediately managing it or minimizing it or putting it somewhere out of sight. Then she pushed through the door. Grant sat at the bar. He took out his phone. He dialed the attorney he'd been in contact with, a man named David Carver, who worked financial crime cases and had a reputation for being more interested in convictions than billing hours. She's ready to talk, Grant said when Carver picked up. Tomorrow. Can you make time? Carver said he could. Grant hung up. He sat for another moment, running through the shape of things as they stood. Wade was scared. Wade was making moves. Wade was also, Grant suspected, beginning to understand that the particular asset he'd spent years building, a wife who was afraid to speak, was no longer behaving like that asset. That was the moment that worried Grant most. Not the complaint, not the rumors. The moment when a frightened man with something to hide realized that his plan was no longer working. That was when frightened men stopped being strategic and started being desperate. And desperate men, in Grant's long experience, were considerably more dangerous than strategic ones. He left money on the bar, enough for his meal, and then some, and walked out into the rain. Across the city, in a house on Ferris Street that she had never been able to think of as fully hers, Lori Whitaker was on the phone with her sister in Pullman. She spoke quietly. She didn't explain everything. She asked one specific question. Her sister said yes without hesitation. Lori hung up. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, listening to the house. Then she went to the place she had kept the copied pages, a place she had never written down, never mentioned, a place she had chosen because it was the only space in her life that Wade had never thought to check, because it was so ordinary, so mundane, so entirely beneath the interest of a man who only looked for things of obvious value. She took the pages out. She counted them. All 11, exactly as she had left them. She put them in an envelope. She sealed it. And for the first time in over a year, she breathed all the way out. Tomorrow, she would drive to Pullman. She would hand the envelope to her sister. She would drive back to Spokane and sit across from a lawyer named David Carver and begin the process of turning 11 pages of copied accounting records into something that could change the trajectory of her life. She did not know yet how hard that process would be. She did not know about the 3 weeks that were coming, the escalating pressure, the sleepless nights, the moment when everything she had carefully constructed would crack open all at once and she would disappear entirely. And 37 motorcycles would head north out of Spokane on a cold November morning looking for her. She didn't know any of that yet. Tonight she just stood in her kitchen and held an envelope and felt, for the first time in years, like a woman who had made a decision that belonged entirely to herself. It was enough. For tonight, it was more than enough. The meeting with David Carver lasted 2 hours and 14 minutes. Lori knew the exact time because she had watched the clock on the wall of his office the entire time, not out of impatience, but out of the particular hypervigilance of a woman who had learned to track time the way a navigator tracks distance, because knowing exactly where you were in a stretch of danger was the only thing that made the danger manageable. Carver was a compact man in his early 50s with reading glasses he kept taking on and off, and a habit of writing things down even when the conversation hadn't yet produced anything worth writing. He had the manner of someone who had heard a great many difficult things over a long career and had made peace with the fact that most of them required patience rather than immediate action. He listened to Lori without interrupting for the first 40 minutes. Then he started asking questions. The questions were precise, specific. He wanted dates. He wanted vehicle identification numbers if she could remember them. He wanted to know the names of any businesses or individuals that appeared in the cash payment records she had copied. He wanted to know whether she had ever been present during a transaction, an actual handover of money or a vehicle, or whether everything she knew came from the paper records alone. Lori answered everything she could. When she got to the part about the Kenworth that had come through from Coeur d'Alene in March, Carver stopped writing and looked at her over his glasses. "You said there was a name on that paperwork," he said. "A name that shouldn't have been there." "I didn't say that," Lori said. "That was how did you know about that?" Carver looked at her steadily. "I didn't. You just told me." She realized she had. She had been talking, and the sentence had come out before she consciously chose to say it, because Carver's questions had created a rhythm that pulled information forward naturally, and she had been following it without noticing. She sat back. "What name?" Carver asked. She told him. He wrote it down. He put his pen down beside the notepad and looked at the name he had written for a moment, the way a person looks at something that has just confirmed a suspicion they weren't entirely comfortable having confirmed. "Miss Whitaker," he said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to understand that your answer changes the scope of what we're dealing with here." "Ask it," she said. "The name you just gave me, do you know who that is?" "I know he's connected to the county," she said. "I looked him up after I saw it. He's on the County Transportation Oversight Board." Carver nodded slowly. He picked up his pen and put it down again. "He's also currently under a separate federal inquiry related to municipal contract fraud in 3 counties. He paused. "If his name appears in your husband's records in connection with a vehicle transaction, that's not just a towing fraud case anymore." The room was very quiet. "What is it?" Lori said. "It's a connection," Carver said carefully, "between a local operation and a much larger criminal network. And if those connections are documented the way you're describing." He stopped. "Where are the originals with my sister?" "Get them back," he said. "Not here. Somewhere neutral. I'm going to make a call today. There are people at the federal level who have been building a case for 2 years that may have a significant gap in it, and what you're describing sounds like it might fill that gap." He looked at her directly. "This is bigger than your husband, Miss Whitaker. I want you to understand that. What you found may be the piece of a much larger puzzle." Lori drove back to Black Pine Tavern in a state that wasn't quite shock, but wasn't quite calm either. It was the particular disorientation of realizing that the thing you had been hiding from in your own kitchen was connected to something far larger than the four walls of your own life. She had known Wade was doing something wrong. She had not known that wrong extended into a network that federal investigators were already examining. She called Grant from the payphone outside the tavern before her shift started. She told him what Carver had said. Grant was quiet for a moment. "Are you surprised?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "I think I always knew it was bigger. I just didn't want to know that I knew." "Okay," he said. "Here's what happens now. Nothing changes on the outside. You go to work. You cook. You act exactly like you have been acting. Do you understand me? Wade cannot know that you talked to Carver." "He might already know," she said. "He has people everywhere. He has people watching the surface of things," Grant said. "Carver's office is not on the surface. Give it 2 days. Carver will make his contact, and then we'll know what kind of support is coming." 2 days. That was what Grant said. What happened instead was 17 days of the most carefully constructed normalcy Lori had ever performed in her life. She went to work. She cooked. She made the meatloaf on Mondays, the biscuits every morning, the apple pie on Fridays. She smiled at the regulars. She trained Pete on the proper way to deglaze a pan, which he had been doing wrong for 6 months. She was, by every external measure, exactly the cook she had always been. Underneath that surface, everything was moving. Carver made his call. The contact at the federal level was interested, very interested, in the particular way that federal investigators get interested when a piece of evidence appears that recontextualizes work they've already done. 2 weeks of preliminary conversations happened in conference rooms and over secure phone lines that Lori was not part of but was kept informed about through Carver, who called her every 3 days with brief, careful updates. Wade, during those 17 days, did 3 things that Grant had predicted and 1 thing that Grant had not. He reduced the physical intimidation. This was predicted. Carver had flagged it as likely, since Wade was smart enough to understand that escalating behavior during a period of uncertainty was strategically stupid. He wanted Lori scared and controllable, not injured and documented. He increased the financial pressure, also predicted. 2 of the accounts that Lori had limited access to were quietly restructured, reducing her ability to move money independently. Grant had already anticipated this and connected Lori with Marlene, who helped her open a separate account at a credit union across town that Wade had no visibility into. He had Travis Boone begin quietly moving records. This was the 3rd predicted thing. Carver had warned her that Wade would start sanitizing documentation once he understood the level of scrutiny coming his way. The 4th thing, the thing Grant had not predicted, was subtler and more dangerous. Wade started being kind. Not the performed kindness of a man trying to repair a relationship. The specific, calculated kindness of a man who understood that his most effective lever had always been Lori's hope. He brought her coffee in the morning. He asked about her day with apparent genuine interest. He stopped checking her phone. He made a comment one evening about how he'd been thinking about their early years together, before everything had gotten so complicated, and how he missed that. Lori sat across from him at the kitchen table and nodded and said she understood. She called Marlene the next morning. "He's doing the cycle," Marlene said, before Lori finished explaining. "I know what it is," Lori said. "Do you?" Marlene asked. Not challenging, checking. Because the cycle is very convincing, even when you know exactly what it is. That's what makes it effective. The kindness is real in the moment. He's not performing it. He actually feels it. And your body remembers the times when things were good, and it responds to those signals even when your mind knows better. "I haven't softened," Lori said, Deb. "I know you haven't. I'm just telling you to keep your guard up during the kindness phase. Because the kindness phase is when people make mistakes." A pause. "How are you sleeping? Not well." "That's honest," Marlene said. "What does not well look like?" 3-4 hours, Lori said. "I wake up at 2 and I can't go back. I lie there and run through everything. The timeline. What I know, what I don't know. Whether I've missed something. That's your brain doing its job, Marlene said. It's exhausting, but it means you're not in denial. Have you talked to Grant this week? Yesterday, Lori said. Good. Keep talking to him. Not because he's solving anything, but because isolation is how this has worked for so long. Every person in your corner is a wall in the other direction. 17 days in, Carver called with news. The federal contact had reviewed the preliminary information. They wanted the original ledger pages. They wanted Lori to come in for a formal interview. They were not yet making commitments, but the interest had escalated from preliminary to active. Lori called her sister that night. Her sister drove the pages to Spokane the following morning. The formal interview was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. 12 days out, Carver gave her a list of what to expect, what to bring, what not to say without his guidance. He was careful and thorough, and she trusted him the way she had learned to trust people in this process, not blindly, not easily, but based on observable evidence of competence and integrity. She told Grant about the interview date. He was quiet for a moment. Then, does Wade know you have the interview? No. Does anyone know besides you? Me, Carver, and your sister? Marlene, good. Keep it that way. She kept it that way for 11 more days. On the 12th day, a Tuesday, she went to work at 4 in the afternoon, the way she always did. By 4:20, she had not arrived. Sandra noticed first. Lori was never late. In 9 years, Sandra could count the times Lori had been more than 5 minutes late on one hand, and every single one of those times she had called ahead. Today, she hadn't called. Sandra checked the parking lot. Lori's car was there, a 10-year-old Buick that Grant's people had quietly repaired 2 weeks ago, replacing the alternator that had been failing for months. The car was there. The driver's side door was unlocked. On the front seat, Sandra found Lori's apron, neatly folded, and her purse. Sandra called Grant immediately. He picked up on the first ring. Her car is in the lot, Sandra said. Her apron and purse are inside it. She never came in. The silence on Grant's end lasted exactly 2 seconds. Call 911, he said. Right now. Tell them exactly what you told me. I'm on my way. He was already moving when he hung up. He called Marlene next. Lori's missing. She never made it into work. Her car's in the Black Pine lot. She had the interview Thursday, Marlene said. The implication was immediate, and both of them heard it. Grant said someone leaked the date. Wade, or Travis Boone, which is worse. He was on his bike now. I'm heading to the tavern. I need you to call Carver and tell him what's happening. And Marlene, if this is what it looks like, then Wade has done something that cannot be undone. He knows that, which means he has nothing left to lose. The words landed between them with the weight of what they actually meant. Go, Marlene said. Go right now. He rode to the tavern in under 6 minutes. Sandra was out front when he arrived, arms crossed over herself against the November cold. Phone in hand, face tight, with the controlled panic of a woman trying to stay functional under pressure. Police are coming, she said. Good. Grant looked at Lori's car. He didn't touch it. He walked around it slowly, looking at everything without touching anything. The unlocked door, the folded apron, and that detail was the one that hit him hardest. Because Lori Whitaker did not fold things when she was rushed. And the fact that the apron was folded meant she had taken a moment to fold it, which meant she had known something was about to happen. And she had done the one small controlled thing available to her. She had folded the apron so it would be found neat. He stood in the parking lot and thought. By the time his phone rang, 5 minutes after he'd arrived, 8 of his riders were already pulling into the lot. He hadn't called them. Word had moved through the network the way it always did, faster than any individual message because it traveled along relationships rather than phone lines. It was one of his men calling from across the city. We're running the Whitaker operations. The main yard on Industrial is closed up, no trucks out. But Danny says Wade's truck was seen heading north on Route 2 about an hour ago. North on Route 2. Grant pulled up the map in his head. North of Spokane on Route 2. Within 40 minutes, there were 3 locations connected to Wade's towing operation, the main yard, which was closed, the satellite dispatch office near Deer Park, which was staffed during business hours. And the old vehicle storage yard, the one that Wade had officially stopped using 3 years ago, the one that existed in county records as a decommissioned property, but that Travis Boone had mentioned to a business contact as recently as 6 months ago. It wasn't officially part of the operation anymore, which made it the most useful place Wade had. Grant called his riders together. They gathered around him in the Black Pine parking lot, 12 men, then 14 as 2 more arrived, then 18 as the word kept traveling. North on Route 2, Grant said. Old storage yard off County Road 4. If she's anywhere, she's there. He looked around the group. The faces were hard and attentive and absolutely serious. These were not men who made theatrical displays of anger. They processed it into action, and the action was already beginning. I need to be absolutely clear about something. No weapons. Not one. Every phone that can record video, keep it running. The police are coming behind us, and when they arrive, I want them to walk into a situation where we have done nothing. Nothing that gives Wade Whitaker a single thing to point at. Are we clear? Heads nodded. We're witnesses, Grant said. That's our job today. We witness. Someone in the back said, what if he's already? Then we witness that too, Grant said. And we let the law do what the law does. Because the goal is not to satisfy anyone in this parking lot. The goal is to make sure Lori Whitaker gets everything she's earned. And that requires Wade going to prison in a way that cannot be appealed. He looked at them. Everyone clear? Everyone was clear. 37 motorcycles left the Black Pine Tavern parking lot heading north. Not a convoy. Not a procession. A moving statement of intent that anyone who saw it understood on a level beneath language. This was not a group of men going for a ride. This was a group of men who had decided something needed to happen and were going to make sure it did. Grant rode at the front. He did not think about what he would do if they arrived too late. He had learned, over many years in situations that required this kind of focus, that the mind must stay on the task and not on the worst-case version of the task, because the worst-case version of the task will pull your attention away from the variables you can still influence. He focused on the road, on the turn coming up, on the timing. They found the yard 22 minutes out of Spokane. Wade's truck was there, pulled inside the property fence. The chain-link gate closed but not locked. Someone had left it on the latch rather than securing it, which meant either they'd been in a hurry or they'd expected to leave quickly. Grant pulled up to the fence, stopped, held up one hand, and the riders behind him stopped with him, engines cutting one by one until there were 37 motorcycles sitting quietly in the road and Grant Mercer standing at the gate with his hand on the chain. He could hear voices from inside. Wade's voice raised, and under it, something that might have been Lori, answering too low and too controlled to make out. But there, she was there. She was speaking. She was upright and talking, which was the most important information available to him at that moment. He pushed the gate open. He walked in alone. The other riders did not follow. They stayed at the fence line, visible, phones raised, engines off, and watched. Grant walked across the property toward the office structure where the voices were coming from. He did not hurry. He moved with the deliberate, measured pace of a man who understood that the quality of his entry would determine the quality of everything that followed. He could hear Wade more clearly now. Don't understand what you've done, Lori. You have no idea what you've put into motion. You think those lawyers are helping you? They're using you. The moment you've served your purpose to them, you're done. You'll have nothing. We'll have nothing. Lori's voice, steady in a way that cost her something. There is no we. Wade, don't say that. A sharp sound, something hitting a surface. Don't you dare stand there and act like 20 years means nothing to you. When I'm standing here acting like. And her voice had the particular quality of a woman who had decided that this was the last time. She was going to have this conversation and was therefore going to have it completely. Is a woman who kept your books for 6 years and watched you steal from the insurance company and the county and God knows who else, and then watched you threaten me every time I got close to the door. And I am done. I am finished. And whatever happens to you next, you built it yourself. Silence from inside. Then Wade's voice, different now, lower. The voice that had never been the shouting or the reasonable husband. The third voice. The one that came when the other two had stopped working. Where is the ledger, Laurie? Not a question. Grant put his hand on the office door. He didn't knock. He pushed it open slowly and stepped inside and stood in the doorway where everyone in the room could see him clearly. Wade was standing in the center of the room, facing Laurie, who was against the far wall. Between them was a desk covered in papers. Wade had clearly been searching through them. Laurie was not restrained. She was not visibly injured. She was standing with her arms at her sides and her chin level and her eyes on Wade. And when Grant came through the door, she didn't break her gaze from her husband, which meant she had known he was coming. Of course she had. She had heard 37 motorcycles. Wade turned. He saw Grant. The calculation that moved across Wade Whitaker's face in that moment was visible, and Rapid Grant could read every stage of it. The initial alarm, then the pull toward aggression, then the recognition that the aggression option was now closed because a man was standing in his doorway who outweighed him by 40 pounds of deliberate calm. And behind that man, through the window, were 37 motorcycles that had not moved. Wade took a breath, his jaw set. He made the choice to try the reasonable voice one more time. Mercer, he said, you need to step back out of here. This is a private family matter. She doesn't look like she wants privacy, Grant said. He hadn't moved from the doorway. He wasn't looking at Laurie. He was looking at Wade directly with the patient focus of a man who had already made all his decisions and was waiting for the situation to confirm them. You have no idea what's going on here, Wade said. She's been making accusations. She's been working with people who want to destroy everything I've built, and she doesn't even understand that they're using her. Wade. Grant's voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. I'm not here to debate with you. I'm here because she's here and she needs to be somewhere else. That's the whole of it. She's my wife. She's herself, Grant said. She belongs to herself. That's all she's ever been. Something about the sentence landed differently than anything else had. Laurie moved not toward the door, not toward Grant. She moved toward the desk. She reached past the papers. Wade had been searching through and picked something up from the far corner of the desk surface. Something that had been sitting there the entire time. Something so ordinary that Wade had looked at it twice without registering what it was. A ledger. Not the copied pages. Those were safe with Carver now. This was the original, the full accounting book. The one from which pages had gone missing over a year ago. The one that Wade had clearly not found during his search because he'd been looking through the papers on the desk rather than under them. Laurie held it with both hands. Wade saw what she was holding, and his face changed completely. That's mine, he said. That is company property, and you have no right. It has my handwriting in it, Laurie said. 6 years of my handwriting. I kept these books, Wade. Every entry, every vehicle, every cash payment you told me to list as a miscellaneous repair expense. She looked at the cover of the ledger and then back at him. I know every single number in here, and I remember what each one was for. Wade took a step toward her. Grant was across the room in 4 steps. Not between them, he positioned himself to the side, visible to both of them, where he could intercept without it looking like aggression. He didn't touch Wade. He didn't threaten him. He just stood there, close enough that Wade understood very clearly that the step he had been about to take was the last step he was going to take in that direction. Wade stopped. From outside came the sound of sirens. 2 vehicles, getting louder. Wade's head turned toward the window. He saw the motorcycles at the fence. He saw the phones held up. He saw the police units pulling onto the road outside the property. And Grant watched the precise moment when Wade Whitaker understood that the situation he had constructed the frightened wife, the private location, the ability to control the narrative had collapsed entirely around him, and that the man who had done that was not the lawyer or the federal investigators or even Grant Mercer. It was Laurie, standing against the wall with her husband's ledger in both hands and her chin level and her eyes completely steady. Wade looked at her. He tried one more time. The last card. The voice that cracked just slightly at the edges. The eyes that filled with something that was almost genuine because it was coming from a real place, the real fear of a man watching everything fall apart. Lori, please, we can fix this. Whatever they've told you, we can fix it. Just put that down and let me. You spent years teaching me to be invisible, Lori said. Her voice didn't shake. You controlled what I saw and who I talked to and where I went and what I was worth. And you thought being invisible meant I wasn't paying attention. She looked at him. Invisible people notice everything, Wade. The police came through the gate. Grant stepped back from Wade immediately and raised both hands open. Visible, exactly as he had been told to do by the attorney he'd consulted 2 days ago. The riders at the fence all lowered their phones but kept them running. Everything was visible. Everything was recorded. There was not one thing in this yard that could be characterized as anything other than what it was. 2 officers came into the office. One of them looked at Grant. Grant nodded toward Wade. This is Wade Whitaker, he said. He brought her here without her consent. She has a scheduled interview with federal investigators on Thursday regarding documented financial crimes. He paused. She's ready to leave. The officer looked at Lori. Ma'am, are you all right? Lori was still holding the ledger. I'm fine, she said. I've been better, but I'm fine. Do you want to press charges for? I want to talk to David Carver, she said. He's my attorney. He knows what's happening. Can you call him? We can do that. Another officer had moved toward Wade. Wade was not resisting. He was standing very still with the particular stillness of a man who had run the calculations one final time and found that every exit was closed. Wade Whitaker, the officer said, I need you to step outside with me. Wade looked at Lori one more time. She did not look away from him. He went outside. In the room after he left, it was very quiet. The officer who had stayed went to the doorway to give Lori space. Grant had stepped back to the wall. Just the 2 of them and the desk full of papers and the ledger in Lori's hands. She was still holding it. Her hands were shaking, finally. Now that Wade was out of the room and the performance of steadiness was no longer required, the physical reality of the last 4 hours was coming through. Her hands were shaking and her breathing had gone ragged at the edges, and she was staring at a point on the opposite wall with the fixed gaze of someone who is waiting to find out whether their legs are still working. Hey, Grant said, quiet. She looked at him. You did it, he said. She shook her head immediately, reflexively. The way someone shakes their head when they are told something they have been trained not to believe about themselves. Lori, he said, did it. Every piece of this. The copies. The call to Marlene, Carver, your sister. And just now, that was you. She looked down at the ledger in her hands. I was so scared, she said. Her voice was barely holding together. The whole time. I was so scared, and I kept thinking I was going to. I know, he said. You were scared the whole time and you did it anyway. She looked up. Outside, through the window, she could see the parking lot filling with police vehicles and the long line of motorcycles still at the fence. Riders standing beside their bikes. Not a performance, just present, just there. 37 people who had ridden 22 miles north of Spokane on a Tuesday afternoon because a woman who cooked good food and kept a careful ledger had finally decided to stop being invisible. Something broke open in Lori's face. Not collapse, something more like relief that had been compressed for so long that when it finally released, it looked almost painful. She pressed the ledger against her chest, held it like it was the most important thing in the room, because it was. Every entry in that book was a date, a number, a transaction that had happened. Wade could claim many things. He could not claim that the numbers were not there. In the handwriting of a woman who had sat at a kitchen table for 6 years and recorded everything she was told to record, and then one day understood what she was looking at and had been quiet about it long enough. She was done being quiet. What happens now, she said. Now we get you out of here, Grant said. And you go talk to Carver. And then the people who know how to do the next part take over. He paused. And you go home and sleep. I don't know if I can sleep, she said. You will tonight, he said. Trust me. She almost smiled. It didn't fully arrive, but it came close. She walked to the doorway and stopped. She looked back at the desk the papers Wade had been searching through, the space where the ledger had been sitting in plain sight the whole time. He looked right at it, she said. 3 times. He never saw it. That's what happens, Grant said, when you spend years deciding what's worth noticing and what isn't. She turned that over. Then she walked out of the office into the cold November air, with the ledger under her arm and 37 witnesses standing at the fence line and 2 police units in the yard, and Wade Whitaker in the back of one of them, and the federal interview 2 days away, and a future that was not fixed or simple or free of difficulty. But that was for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, entirely uncontrolled by anyone except herself. She stopped in the middle of the yard and breathed. The cold air came into her lungs. She let it. The federal interview lasted 4 hours and 37 minutes. Lori knew that too. She had counted every one of them. Carver sat beside her the entire time, and twice he put his hand briefly on the table between them, not touching her. Just present, the way a good attorney signals that the person beside them is not alone in the room. The investigators were 2 men and 1 woman, all of them from a Seattle field office, all of them with the specific kind of focused, hurried manner that told Lori they had been waiting for this conversation longer than she had been preparing for it. They went through everything methodically. The ledger, the copied pages, the dates, the vehicle identification numbers, the name on the Kenworth paperwork, the cash payment patterns, the false towing records, the names of businesses that appeared as intermediaries in transactions that had no legitimate explanation. At the 2-hour mark, one of the male investigators left the room for 12 minutes. When he came back, something in the way he sat down was different. He exchanged a look with the female investigator that lasted half a second and communicated something Lori couldn't fully read, but that Carver clearly could, because she felt him sit up slightly straighter beside her. At the 3-hour mark, the female investigator leaned forward. "Miss Whitaker," she said, "I want to be transparent with you about something. The information you've provided today, specifically the documentation related to the March Kenworth transaction, and the name attached to it, fills a gap in an investigation that has been ongoing for 26 months. She paused. "You are not simply a domestic violence witness or a fraud complainant. You are a material witness in a federal case involving organized financial crimes, insurance fraud, and corruption of a municipal official." Another pause. "What you brought into this room today is significant." Lori sat with that for a moment. "How significant?" she said. The investigator glanced at her colleague, then back at Lori. "Significant enough that we are going to want to talk about witness protection protocols." The room went very quiet. Carver spoke first. "Let's discuss what that means in practical terms before my client responds to anything." What it meant, in practical terms, was a conversation that lasted another 97 minutes. And at the end of it, Lori walked out of the federal building in downtown Spokane into a gray November afternoon with Carver beside her and a level of exhaustion so complete that it had gone past feeling like tiredness and become something closer to weightlessness. She stood on the sidewalk. She didn't say anything for a moment. Carver waited. "He's been doing this for 6 years, she said. "At least 6 years. That's what they said. At least Carver confirmed. "And that man on the transportation board, the one whose name is on the paperwork. He's been facilitating county contract awards to businesses connected to the network," Carver said, "in exchange for money that moved through exactly the kind of operation your husband was running. Wade wasn't the top of this. He was a middle layer." She absorbed that. "Travis knew," she said. "Travis almost certainly built the structure," Carver said. "Wade provided the infrastructure, the trucks, the yards, the legitimate business front. Travis provided the connections and the financial architecture." He paused. "Miss Whitaker, you should know something. The name on that Kenworth paperwork has been on investigators' radar for 2 years. They had circumstantial connections. They had patterns. What they did not have was a single piece of primary documentation linking him directly to a specific transaction." He looked at her. "You had that. You've been carrying it in your sister's house in Pullman for over a year. She thought about that. About the year she had spent folding aprons and making meatloaf and lying awake at 2 in the morning running through everything she knew, while in a manila envelope in her sister's spare bedroom sat the document that two federal investigators had spent 26 months looking for. I didn't know what I had, she said. Most people don't, Carver said. That's not a failure. That's what happens when the information is embedded in the normal routines of a life. He put his briefcase under his arm. I need you to do something for me. Go home, not your home. Somewhere safe and sleep. Tomorrow, I'm going to have a more detailed conversation with the investigators about the next steps, and I need you rested enough to make clear decisions. I can't go back to that house, she said. I know, he said. That's not what I meant. She called Marlene from the payphone on the corner. Marlene had a room ready. She had it ready for 3 days, a spare bedroom, at a colleague's apartment 2 miles from the advocacy center, quiet, with a lock on the door that operated from the inside. She gave Lori the address without making any ceremony out of it, which was one of the things Lori had come to value most about Marlene. She did not perform compassion. She just arranged things. Lori slept for 11 hours. She woke up at 6 in the morning and lay in an unfamiliar bed in an unfamiliar room and stared at the ceiling and waited for the familiar dread to arrive, the particular weight that had lived in her chest for years. The first thing in the morning heaviness of a woman who woke up every day knowing that the day ahead required more careful management than she had energy for. It didn't come. Something else came instead, not peace. Not yet. Peace was a long way off, and she knew it. But something quieter than dread. Something that felt, tentatively, like the first hour of the first day of a different kind of life. She got up. She found the kitchen. She made coffee and sat at the table and thought about Wade. Not with fear, not with anger. Exactly. With the particular clarity that comes when the source of terror is no longer in the same room as you, and you can finally see its actual dimensions, smaller than the shadow it cast, more ordinary than the power it wielded, a man rather than a force of nature. She had lived with a man who had made himself feel like a force of nature for so long that she had forgotten the differences. She was remembering now. Marlene came by at 9. She sat across from Lori at the kitchen table and put a folder down between them. Inside were documents housing applications, financial assistance forms, information about a credit counseling service that worked specifically with women leaving long-term, financially controlled relationships. We're going to go through these together, Marlene said. Not today, when you're ready. But I want you to see them now so you know they exist. Lori looked at the folder. He froze the accounts. I know. Carver is working on an emergency motion. Given the arrest and the federal involvement, there's a strong argument for releasing funds that came from your labor, your salary, your direct contributions. It won't be fast, but it will happen. Marlene paused. The credit union account. How much is in it? Enough for 3 months, Lori said. If I'm careful. You'll be careful, Marlene said. It wasn't a command. It was the statement of a woman who had watched Lori for 2 months and had accurate information about what she was capable of. I need to go back to work, Lori said. Marlene looked at her. The tavern. I need to cook, Lori said simply. I need to go in and make the biscuits and run the grill and have something that is completely normal, because everything else right now is, she stopped. I need one thing that is just mine, that nobody has touched. Marlene studied her for a moment. All right, are you safe there? Wade is in custody. Travis Boone is not, Marlene said. The reminder landed hard. In the velocity of the past 72 hours, Travis had remained peripheral in Lori's thinking, the quieter, more careful figure behind Wade's louder presence. But Marlene was right. Travis was still out there. Travis was smarter than Wade in the ways that mattered for staying free, and the investigators had confirmed that he had not yet been located. Do you think he'd come after me? Lori said. I think he's running, Marlene said. But running men are also unpredictable men. The same thing Grant said about desperate men applies. She paused. Call Grant. Tell him you're going back to work. He'll handle the rest. Grant's response. When she called was exactly 3 words, "I'll be there." She went back to Black Pine Tavern that afternoon. Sandra met her at the kitchen door. She didn't say anything dramatic. She just held the door open and said, "Biscuits are started, but I did them wrong." And Lori walked in and looked at Sandra's biscuit attempt and said, "You use self-rising flour." And Sandra said, "Is that bad?" And Lori said, "Where did you even find self-rising flour?" And Sandra said, "I panicked." And Lori laughed for the first time in what felt like weeks. It was a small laugh. It didn't last long, but it was real. She tied her apron on. She went to work. Grant arrived at 5 with 4 riders and parked in the lot. He came inside and sat at the bar and ate dinner. And they didn't speak much, but twice Lori came out of the kitchen for something, and they made eye contact across the room. And both times what passed between them was the specific communication of 2 people who had been through something together and did not need to describe it to each other. 3 days passed. On the 4th day, Travis Boone was located. He had made it as far as Portland, a motel off I-5, registered under a business name connected to one of the shell companies investigators had been tracing. The Portland field office picked him up on a Tuesday morning. By noon, Carver had confirmed it to Lori by phone. She was at the prep counter when he called. She set down what she was holding, listened, said thank you, and hung up. She stood at the counter for a moment. Pete was across the kitchen, pretending to check the refrigerator inventory. "You okay?" Pete said, without looking up from his clipboard. "Yeah," she said. "Yeah, I really am." She picked up what she'd been holding and went back to work. What followed was not a clean, linear process. Lori had been around enough honest people in the past 2 months to understand that clean and linear were not words that applied to federal investigations or to the work of rebuilding a life that had been systematically dismantled over 2 decades. It was instead a series of distinct, manageable tasks that accumulated into progress the way miles accumulated on a long drive. You didn't feel them while you were covering them, but you looked back eventually, and the distance was real. Marlene helped her apply for emergency housing assistance. A 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Spokane became available through a nonprofit that Marlene had a relationship with, and Lori moved in on a Saturday in early December with 4 boxes of belongings. Because 20 years in a house, and that was what she had, that was actually hers. 4 boxes. Her kitchen things, a good knife she'd bought with her own money 15 years ago, a cast iron pan she'd had since before the marriage, her books, her clothes, a photo of her and her sister from 1987 that she'd kept in her locker at the tavern because she'd known, even then, that some things needed to stay somewhere Wade couldn't see them. She stood in the empty apartment on moving day and looked around at the 4 boxes and the spaces and the window with the afternoon light coming through it. Her sister was behind her, having made the drive from Pullman to help. "It doesn't look like much," her sister said, looking at the boxes. "No," Lori said. "Are you okay with that?" Lori turned to look at the window again, at the light, at the fact that the light was coming into a space that was hers alone. No calculation required about how the light landed. No awareness of where someone else was standing. No management of atmosphere or mood or potential flashpoints. Just light in a room. "Yeah," she said. 2 days after she moved in, Grant showed up at the apartment with 4 of his riders. They had a truck. In the truck were things not charity. He was very careful to explain before she could object, but things he'd sourced, specifically, because she was about to start living in a space that needed them. A good lamp, a solid kitchen table with 2 chairs, a bookshelf, a rug for the living room floor. "I'm not accepting charity," she said, standing at the door. "It's not charity," he said. "The table came from Danny's garage. He's had it for 3 years, and his wife has been trying to get rid of it. The bookshelf came from a guy who owed me a favor. The lamp cost $11 at the thrift store on Monroe. The rug was $12. He looked at her steadily. "Lori, people who care about the outcome of your life found some furniture. You can either let us bring it in, or we can have a long, principled argument in the doorway while your apartment stays empty." She stepped back from the door. "Fine," she said. "Thank you," he said. They brought everything in. The writers were efficient about it. These were men who were accustomed to physical tasks done without excess commentary, and they had the apartment furnished in under 40 minutes. Afterward, Lori made coffee on the small stovetop, and they drank it standing in the kitchen because there weren't enough chairs yet, and nobody mentioned the circumstances, and it was one of the most normal hours Lori had experienced in longer than she could track. When everyone else had gone, Grant stayed for a few minutes to finish his coffee. "How's the case looking?" Lori asked. "Carver says strong," Grant said. The Kenworth documentation connected three things the investigators had been trying to connect for 2 years. Wade's lawyer is going to try to negotiate, which means he'll offer to testify about the Transportation Board official in exchange for reduced charges. The federal team may or may not take that deal, but either way, he paused. Either way, what you put into that room last Thursday is what's driving the whole thing now. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. The kitchen was small and warm and smelled like the coffee, and outside the window was her street, her neighborhood, her city in a way that it hadn't been before. "Travis," she said. "Cooperating, apparently," Grant said. "Carver heard from a contact that Boone is providing financial records in exchange for consideration on sentencing, which means the documentation coming out of this is going to be extensive." "Good," she said. Then, because she had been turning it over for a week and needed to say it out loud to someone, "I keep thinking about who I would have been if none of this had happened. If I just kept my head down, kept folding the aprons, gone home every night and managed it." She paused. "I don't know who that person would have been in 5 years." Grant said nothing. He was listening in the way he listened completely, without the restless energy of someone waiting for their turn to speak. "I think I would have gotten smaller," she said. "Not physically. But everything that made me would have gotten quieter and quieter until eventually it was just..." She stopped. "I almost let that happen. I was so close to letting that happen." "But you didn't," Grant said. "No," she said. "Because you kept the ledger," he said. "Even when you were terrified. Even when keeping it was dangerous. You kept it. That's not a small thing, Lori. That's a person protecting the truth when the truth has nobody else to protect it." She looked at her coffee cup. She thought about the night she had first copied those pages sitting at the kitchen table in the Ferris Street house at 2 in the morning while Wade slept. The ledger open in front of her, her hands shaking just enough to make the handwriting unsteady. She had not known exactly why she was doing it. She had told herself it was insurance. But sitting here now in her own kitchen, in her own apartment, she thought that what she had actually been doing was leaving a door open. A small door in a very dark wall that she hadn't been sure she would ever walk through. She had walked through it. It had cost her more than she had known it would cost. And she was sitting here on the other side of it. The preliminary hearing was in January. Lori attended with Carver beside her and Marlene, one row back. Wade was brought in from the county holding facility, wearing a suit that his attorney had arranged, and he looked not diminished exactly, but differently proportioned than the man who had filled doorways and trucks and whole rooms with his particular brand of certain authority. He looked like a man in a suit in a courtroom, which was all he was, which was the thing that courtrooms were good at making visible. He did not look at her when he came in. He looked once, briefly, when the charges were read: insurance fraud, falsification of public records, financial crimes, conspiracy, intimidation of a witness. The list took longer to read than Lori had expected, and each item landed in the courtroom with the particular flat weight of official language, doing what official language does best, making undeniable the things that had previously been deniable. Wade's eyes found hers during the intimidation charge. She held his gaze. She did not look away. He did. Outside the courthouse afterward, standing on the steps in January cold, with Carver on one side and Marlene on the other, Lori breathed the cold air and felt something she had not expected to feel at this particular moment. Not triumph, not relief, something quieter. She felt like herself, the woman she had been before she had learned to make herself small enough to survive a particular life. the woman who had existed before the management and the calculation, and the careful daily work of taking up the minimum possible space. She didn't feel like she had recovered that woman. Exactly, she felt like she had found out that woman had never fully gone away. She had just been very, very quiet for a long time. The months between January and the trial were not easy. She would be the first to say that clearly and without romanticizing it. There were hearings and depositions and phone calls with Carver that left her drained, and there were nights when the lock on her apartment door felt insufficient, and nights when a sound in the hallway pulled her out of sleep into full alert. There were mornings when the thought of walking into Black Pine Tavern felt like more than she had energy for, and she went anyway because cooking was the one thing that had been entirely hers throughout everything, the one skill, the one space, the one practice that Wade had never managed to colonize. She went. She cooked. She made the biscuits and the meatloaf and the apple pie. She trained Pete properly on the deglazing technique, and eventually he stopped doing it wrong. She hired a second-line cook, a woman named Rosa, who was 28 and fast and had the kitchen instincts of someone twice her age, and Laurie discovered that teaching was something she was good at. In the same way, she was good at cooking, not by explaining from a distance, but by standing beside someone and showing them with her hands. Sandra noticed the change before Laurie articulated it herself. "You're different," Sandra said one afternoon at the end of a lunch shift. "Different how?" Laurie said. "You're louder," Sandra said. "Not volume, but you take up more space. You say things when you used to let them go. Last week when the supply delivery was wrong, you called the distributor yourself. You didn't ask me to handle it." Laurie thought about that. "I used to think asking for things was dangerous," she said. "If you needed something, you were a burden. If you corrected something, you were difficult." She paused. "I'm unlearning that. It looks good on you," Sandra said. Grant came into the tavern twice a week through the winter and into spring. Always for dinner, always the steak, always with the same easy courtesy toward the staff that had characterized his visits since before any of this had started. What changed was the quality of his conversations with Laurie. They had moved from the careful, measured communication of two people navigating a crisis to something more ordinary and more durable. They talked about things that had nothing to do with Wade or the case. She asked him once about the chapter's annual charity ride, and he spent 20 minutes telling her about the logistics of it, and she listened and asked questions. And at some point she realized they were just two people talking, and the simplicity of that felt like something to be grateful for. He never pushed for more than that. He never made her gratitude into something she owed him, never let the weight of what he'd done tip into expectation. He came and he ate, he tipped Sandra too well, and he left. And the rhythm of it, the ordinary, reliable, uncharged rhythm of it, was one of the things that helped Laurie understand what normal was supposed to feel like. The trial date was set for late spring. 3 weeks before it, Carver called with news that shifted the landscape again. Wade had taken the deal. Not a full plea, a cooperation agreement. He would testify against the Transportation Board official in exchange for a reduction in his own sentencing exposure. The federal team had accepted it because the official was the larger target, and Wade's testimony, combined with Laurie's documentation, was sufficient to make the larger case. "What does that mean for me?" Laurie asked. "It means you will still need to testify," Carver said, "but the dynamic changes. Wade is now a cooperating witness on the federal charges, which means his attorney's strategy shifts entirely. He cannot attack your credibility without undermining his own cooperation deal." She was quiet for a moment. "So he can't come after me in court." "Not the way he might have tried," Carver said. "The intimidation charge still stands as part of his plea. He's admitted to it." She sat with that. "He admitted to it," she said. "In writing," Carver said. "Signed by his attorney." She had spent so many years in a world where what happened in private was categorically different from what was acknowledged in public, where the man who pressed his thumb into her wrist was also the man who made concerned phone calls to the bar asking if his wife was all right. The gap between those two versions of reality had been the space she had lived in, and it had been enormous and suffocating and had made her question her own perception constantly. And now, on a Thursday in April, with rain against her apartment window and a coffee cup in her hand, a document existed with Wade Whitaker's signature on it in which he acknowledged what he had done. The gap had closed. She didn't cry. She had thought she might. She had expected some large emotional release at a moment like this, the kind of catharsis that made sense in movies. Instead, what she felt was very simple and very quiet. It was the feeling of a door closing, not dramatically, just firmly, with the particular solidity of a door that is closing for the last time. "Thank you, David," she said. "You did the work," he said. She thought about saying something else, and then didn't, because Carver was a man who meant what he said, and she had learned to take that at face value. She hung up. Marlene picked up, heard Lori's voice, and said, "Good news or complicated news?" "Good news," Lori said. "Tell me," she told her. Marlene was quiet for a moment. "Then, how are you feeling?" "Like myself," Lori said. Another pause. "I know what you mean," Marlene said. "I've heard women describe it that way before." "It's the right description." "Marlene," Lori said, "I want to talk to you about something. When all of this is finished, the trial, the sentencing, all of it, I've been thinking about what I want to do next. Not at the tavern. Something of my own." Marlene's voice shifted in the way it shifted when she was paying close attention. "Tell me." "I've been cooking in someone else's kitchen for 9 years, Lori said. "I'm good at it. I'm very good at it. And I think—" She stopped. Started again. "I think I want a kitchen that's mine. I don't know what that looks like yet. I don't know if it's possible. But I know that I've been thinking about it every morning when I drive past this empty building on—" "Don't tell me the location yet," Marlene said. "Save that for when we sit down together. But I want you to know something, Lori." A pause. "There are people and resources specifically designed to help women in your situation start exactly what you're describing. And you have something most people don't have." "What's that?" "You already know how to run a kitchen," Marlene said. "That part nobody has to teach you." Lori looked out her window. The rain had eased off. The afternoon light was coming through thin and pale, and entirely itself. "No," she said. "Nobody has to teach me that." She sat for a moment after she hung up. In the quiet of her apartment, in the particular quality of an afternoon that belonged only to her, she thought about the empty building on the street she drove past every morning. She thought about what it could smell like if a proper kitchen was running in it. She thought about biscuits in the morning and meatloaf on Mondays and apple pie on Fridays and a sign on the door with her name on it. She thought about a kitchen with a deadbolt and a key that was entirely hers. She got up. She put on her jacket. She had a dinner shift starting in 2 hours, and there was prep work to be done. And Pete needed to be checked on his stock rotation. And Rosa had a question about the Friday specials that Lori had been meaning to address. She had work to do. She had always had work to do. The difference now was that the work was leading somewhere. She locked her apartment door behind her and walked down the stairs and out into the pale April afternoon. And there was nothing waiting for her outside except the city and the drive to work and the ordinary, extraordinary fact of a life that was, in every way that mattered, completely and finally her own. The sentencing happened on a Wednesday morning in late June, and Lori wore the same jacket she had worn to the preliminary hearing in January, not because it was her best one, but because she had made a decision standing in her closet the night before that she wanted to walk into that courtroom in something she associated with the beginning of all this, so that walking out of it would feel like the complete arc it was. Carver met her on the courthouse steps at 8:15. He looked at her for a moment and said, "Ready?" "I've been ready since November," she said. They went in. Wade received 4 years on the federal fraud and conspiracy charges, with an additional 18 months on the state intimidation charge to run consecutively. Travis Boone received 6 years more than Wade, because the cooperation agreement had reduced Wade's exposure and because the financial architecture of the operation, once fully mapped by investigators, pointed to Travis as the primary designer. The transportation board official, whose name Lori had read in a ledger at 2 in the morning over a year ago, received 9 years. His sentencing had happened 3 weeks earlier, and Lori had not attended that one. But Carver had called her immediately after with the number, and she had sat in her apartment kitchen and held the phone long after she'd hung up and thought about the distance between a number written in a ledger and a number of years in a federal facility. Numbers meant things. She had always known that. She had spent 6 years proving it. When the judge read Wade's sentence, Lori did not feel the rush of satisfaction she had half expected. What she felt was more like the sensation of setting down something very heavy, not the joy of being free of it, but the physical reality of the weight leaving your hands. The ache of muscles that had been contracted for so long they had forgotten how to open. Wade was let out. He did not look at her this time either. She did not need him to. Outside on the courthouse steps, Carver shook her hand. Marlene, who had come and sat in the third row, came out behind them and stood beside Lori in the morning sun, without saying anything for a moment, which was exactly right. "How do you feel?" Marlene finally asked. Lori thought about the honest answer. "Like it's over," she said, "and like everything is just beginning." Marlene nodded. "That's exactly what it is." Grant was not at the sentencing. She had not asked him to come, and he had not offered. There was an understanding between them that the courtroom was Lori's territory, her work, her outcome, her moment to stand in without anyone beside her who might absorb any portion of what it meant. She had walked in with her attorney and walked out with her future, and those were the only two things that needed to be in that room. She called him from the payphone on the corner afterward, the same payphone she had used for months, because it was outside the federal building and had become, through repetition, a kind of landmark in the geography of this chapter of her life. He picked up on the second ring. "It's done," she said. "A beat. How much?" she told him. He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone who didn't know what to say, but the silence of someone absorbing something that had been a long time coming. "That's right," he said. "Yeah," she said. "Are you okay?" She leaned against the wall beside the phone and looked at the street. People were walking past. A couple with a stroller. A man in a postal uniform. An elderly woman with a shopping bag. The ordinary, complete, entirely indifferent activity of a city going about its morning. While Lori Whitaker stood on a corner having just watched the judge close the last door on the longest chapter of her life. "I'm better than okay," she said. "I don't have a word for what I am." "You don't need one right now," Grant said. "No," she agreed. "I don't." She went back to work that afternoon. Sandra had already heard in the way that Sandra always heard things, through the particular osmosis of a woman who had worked a public-facing job in a mid-sized city for 11 years. She looked at Lori when she came through the door, and Lori nodded, and Sandra said, "Good," and went back to rolling silverware, and that was the entirety of the conversation they needed to have about it. Rosa was in the kitchen, already prepped. She looked up when Lori came in and read her face with the quick accuracy of a young woman who had developed sensitive antennae for the emotional temperature of a room. "Good day," she said. "Good day," Lori said. She tied on her apron and went to work. That evening, after closing, she sat at the kitchen prep counter with a cup of coffee and a notepad that she had been carrying in her bag for 6 weeks. The notepad had a single line written on the first page, in her own handwriting, that she had put there the morning after her conversation with Marlene in April. The line read, "What would it take?" Beneath it, over the 6 weeks since she'd written it, she had been adding answers. Not in any systematic way, just when something occurred to her. When she did the math on something, when she had a conversation that produced a number, or a name, or a resource she needed to hold on to. The page was dense now. 2 pages were dense. She had been thinking about this more rigorously than she had admitted to anyone, including Marlene, because she had learned through a very specific kind of experience that the difference between a plan and a wish was the quality of detail, and she had not wanted to share this until the detail was real enough to be taken seriously. She looked at the notepad for a long time. Then she called Marlene. "I'm ready to talk about the building," she said. The building was a former diner on a side street, 3 blocks off the main commercial district, a place that had operated under 3 different owners in the past decade, none of them successfully, and that had been sitting empty for 14 months. Lori had driven past it every morning on her way to Black Pine Tavern. She had stopped parking in front of it 3 months ago and started going inside to look through the windows, which was when she had started taking the notepad seriously. The kitchen infrastructure was intact. That was the thing about diners. The bones of a good one were always there, even when everything else had failed. The grill was old but functional. The hood ventilation was sound. The walk-in cooler needed work but was repairable. The dining room was small, 8 tables at full capacity, which was exactly right for 1 cook and 1 server, and a menu that did not need to be complicated to be extraordinary. Marlene had a meeting with a woman from a small business development organization the following Tuesday. She brought Lori. The woman's name was Patricia, and she had 20 years of experience helping people navigate the specific, complicated landscape of small food service business ownership. And she looked at Lori's notepad for 10 minutes and asked 4 sharp questions, and then said, "This is serious planning. This is not a daydream." "No," Lori said. "It's not." There was a loan program through a state women's business initiative. There was a separate grant available for business in commercial spaces that had been vacant over 12 months. The building on Lori Street qualified. Patricia had connections at the bank that had recently started a small business lending program specifically targeting people rebuilding after domestic financial abuse. 3 potential sources of capital, none of them requiring Lori to have a credit history that had spent 2 decades being controlled by someone else, because the programs had been designed specifically for people in exactly Lori's situation. Lori sat in that meeting and listened and took notes and felt something she hadn't expected to feel. She felt qualified, not rescued, not accommodated, qualified. She had 9 years of kitchen management experience and the documented operational knowledge of running a grill through a dinner rush solo for the better part of a decade, and those were credentials that nobody had given her and nobody could take back. "What would you call it?" Patricia asked at the end of the meeting. Just conversationally, the way you ask someone about a dream while you're still in the room where it might become real. Lori didn't hesitate. She had known the answer to this particular question for months. "Lori's table," she said. Patricia smiled. "I like that." The loan took 11 weeks to finalize. The grant came through 6 weeks after that. The lease on the building was signed on a Tuesday afternoon in October. 14 months after the night, Lori had sat on the floor beside a sack of potatoes and pressed her apron against her mouth so nobody could hear her cry. She stood in the empty building after signing and turned around slowly in the middle of the dining room. 8 tables, a kitchen through the door on the left, a window that faced the street, a ceiling with 1 light that needed replacing, a floor that needed refinishing, a bathroom that needed new fixtures, an entire building that needed weeks of work before it would be ready for a single customer to sit down and eat. She had never wanted anything so much in her entire life. She called Grant. "I signed the lease," she said. A pause. Then, with the particular warmth of a man who did not use warmth carelessly, "Congratulations, Lori. I need to tell you something," she said. "The renovation, the physical work. I've been quoted on contractors, and I can cover some of it from the grant, but there's a gap, a significant gap, and She stopped. This was the part she had rehearsed, because asking for help was still something she was actively unlearning how to avoid. "I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking if you know anyone who does good work and might consider doing some of it in exchange for, I don't know, future meals." An arrangement. Grant was quiet for a moment. "I know some people," he said. "I know you know some people," she said. "That's why I'm asking." He laughed. It was a short laugh, surprised out of him, genuine in the way things were genuine when they weren't planned. "I'll make some calls," he said. "But Lori, same rule as before. You're in charge of what happens in that building. My people do the work you need done the way you need it done. They don't make decisions." "I know," she said. "I have a list." "Of course you do," he said. The renovation took 6 weeks. Grant's riders and not just his chapter. It turned out, because word traveled in that community the way it traveled through all communities, built on loyalty, and history showed up on weekends in numbers that overwhelmed the building in the best possible way. They were not all skilled tradesmen, but enough of them were. An electrician from the chapter in Yakima drove over 2 weekends running and rewired the kitchen lighting properly. A man named Carrillo, who had done tile work for 30 years, refinished the dining room floor in 3 days. 2 others rebuilt the walk-in cooler compressor from parts they sourced from a restaurant supply warehouse going out of business in Ellensburg. Lori was there every day. She made decisions about everything: what color to paint the walls, which way to orient the tables, what grade of ventilation filter to install above the grill, where to position the pass-through window so that food came up at the right angle for a single cook working alone. She asked for input when she wanted it and thanked people for opinions she didn't take, and nobody made anything difficult about either. One Saturday afternoon, a man she didn't recognize was painting the exterior trim and doing it wrong, the wrong technique for the type of paint on that particular surface, which would mean peeling within a year. She walked outside and showed him the correct method, physically demonstrating with her own brush, and he watched and adjusted and thanked her. She walked back inside, and Sandra, who had come to help with cleaning, was looking at her with an expression that Lori recognized. "What?" Lori said. "You just corrected a man twice your size about painting technique," Sandra said, and he said, "Thank you." "It was the wrong technique," Lori said. "I know," Sandra said. "That's not what I'm saying." She looked at Lori steadily. "You didn't hesitate. You just walked out and showed him." Lori thought about that for a moment. "I've been doing this kitchen for 9 years," she said. "I know what I know." "Yeah," Sandra said. "You do." Lori's table opened on the first Sunday in December. She had not advertised. She had not put a sign in the window until 3 days before opening. She had told Sandra, Marlene Carver, her sister, and Grant. She had posted a hand-lettered notice in the window that gave the opening date and the hours and the phrase, "Home cooking. Everything made from scratch." She arrived at 5 in the morning on opening Sunday to begin prep. The biscuits needed 2 hours. The meatloaf, her meatloaf, the one that regulars at Black Pine Tavern had been ordering for 9 years, the one that she had spent 6 months quietly perfecting, a variation of that was entirely her own, needed to go in by 7. The soup needed to be on by 8. The pie crusts needed to be rolled before 9 or they'd be rushed. She put her key in the lock of her restaurant and went to work. By 9 o'clock, the smell was coming out from under the door and through the ventilation and onto the street, because good cooking cannot be contained and does not try to be. By 10, a woman Lori had never met was peering through the front window. Lori unlocked the front door at 11. "We're open," she said. The woman came in. She sat at a table by the window. She ordered the meatloaf special and the biscuits and the soup, and she ate all of it, and when she paid, she said, "This is the best food I've had in Spokane in 10 years. And Lori said, "Come back on Friday, the pie is better." And the woman said she absolutely would. By noon, all 8 tables were full. By 12:30, 3 people were waiting. Lori worked the grill alone, which she had known she would need to do today. She had built the menu specifically around what one person could execute without shortcuts, because quality was not something she was willing to trade for speed, and never had been. Rosa came in at 1 without being asked. She had heard from Sandra, who had heard from someone else, and she walked into the kitchen, tied on an apron, and said, "Tell me where you need me." And Lori pointed to the prep station, and Rosa was there for the rest of the afternoon, without any ceremony about it. Sandra appeared at 2 and started bussing tables without a word. By 3 o'clock, Grant Mercer pulled into the street outside Lori's table on his motorcycle. He sat for a moment. He had ridden past this building dozens of times over the past year. He had ridden past it when it was empty, when it was under renovation, when the hand-lettered sign appeared 3 days ago. He had not stopped because there were moments that needed to happen at their own pace, and stopping too early would have changed what they were. He looked at the sign. Lori's table. He got off the bike. He went inside. Every table was full. Rosa was moving between them with the efficient grace of someone who had found her rhythm. The smell from the kitchen was extraordinary, not the generic warmth of a diner, but something specific and skilled. The smell of food being made by someone who understood it at a cellular level. Grant found a stool at the small counter, along one wall 3 stools, enough for overflow, positioned where a person could see through the pass-through window into the kitchen. He sat down. After a moment, Lori appeared at the pass-through. She had a plate in each hand, and her hair was coming loose from its bun, the way it did when she'd been working hard for several hours. And there was a small smear of something on her left sleeve that she hadn't noticed, and she looked exactly the way she looked in every kitchen she had ever worked in present, focused, completely in command of her space. She looked up and saw him. She didn't break stride. She passed the plates through to Rosa and called something back to Rosa about the soup on table 4. And then she turned back to the grill for a moment, and then she looked at him again. "You came," she said. "You opened," he said. She gestured at the stool with one hand. "Sit down, stay," and went back to the grill. He stayed. Rosa brought him a menu. He looked at it for about 4 seconds and handed it back. "Whatever she thinks is best today," he said. Rosa looked at him. "You sure about that? She hasn't made a bad decision in this kitchen in as long as I've been eating her food," he said. "I'm sure." What came out of the kitchen 20 minutes later was the meatloaf, her meatloaf, not the black pine version, something that was the same in its foundation and completely her own in its execution, with the mashed potatoes and the roasted vegetables and the biscuit on the side that was so good it made the rest of the plate unnecessary as a practical matter while also being exactly right beside it. He ate every bite. Lori came out at the end of the rush, when the last lunch tables were finishing and the Sunday afternoon lull was beginning. She untied her apron from the front and retied it in the back a small shift. The cook going from full service mode to the slightly more relaxed mode of a kitchen between rushes, and she sat on the stool beside Grant, and Rosa brought her a cup of coffee without being asked. "How'd it go?" Grant said. "All 8 tables turned over 3 times," she said. "I ran out of meatloaf at 2 o'clock. I'm going to need to adjust the prep quantities." "That's a good problem, it is," she agreed. She held her coffee cup with both hands. "The biscuits sold out at noon. I had people asking for more at 12:15. I didn't have them." She paused. "I'm going to need to find the right balance between what I can make and what I can sell. I've never had to think about it from that direction before. Always had to think about waste. Now I'm thinking about supply. Different kind of math," he said. "Better kind," she said. He smiled. She saw it, and it made something in her chest loosen slightly. The way things loosened when something that has been held carefully for a long time gets to relax. "Thank you for the renovation," she said. "I know I said thank you at the time, but now that it's real, it means something different." "The work was good," he said. "Carrillo hasn't had a real project in months." He was glad to have it. Grant. I want to pay it back. I know what you're going to say. I'm not going to say anything. But I mean it. Not all at once. But I'm keeping track. And when this place is stable, I'm going to... Lori." He turned on the stool to look at her directly. "You don't owe me anything. You don't owe any of my people anything. What happened, all of it, was not a transaction. Do you understand me?" She met his eyes. She understood him. She also understood that she was going to keep track anyway, because she was a woman who had spent 6 years keeping immaculate records, and some habits were worth keeping. She just wasn't going to argue about it today. "I have something to show you," she said. She got up from the stool and walked to the kitchen door. Not the back door, the heavy commercial kitchen door with the steel frame and the small window set into it and the deadbolt on the right-hand side. She stopped in front of it and looked at it for a moment with the expression of someone who has thought about a thing for a long time and is now standing in front of the real version of it. Grant came to stand beside her. He looked at the door. At the deadbolt, heavy-duty, commercial grade, the kind installed by someone who intended it to last. "You almost didn't Put one in, he said. He remembered what she'd said she would say from the outline of this moment that he had imagined on more than one quiet evening. She looked at him sideways. How did you know that? I didn't, he said. I guessed. She looked back at the door. I stood in the hardware store for 20 minutes, she said. I kept thinking I don't want this door to mean what the other door meant. I don't want to build a lock into my own kitchen and think about being locked in. She paused. Then I thought about what you said. That night, you said the lock was already there. You just turned it. I remember, he said. I realized I was thinking about it wrong, she said. The door at Black Pine didn't protect me because of the lock. It protected me because of who turned it and why, and then who held the key after that. She looked at the deadbolt. So I put one in for emergencies. But this one is different. He waited. She reached into her apron pocket and took out a key. A single key on a plain ring. She held it up between them. I'm the only one with this, she said. It was such a simple sentence. 5 words. The kind of sentence that in most contexts would mean nothing, would be completely unremarkable. Unremarkable, the kind of thing a person says without thinking of, because of course they're the only one with the key to their own door. But in the context of a woman who had spent 2 decades in a life where she had never fully held the key to anything, where every lock and every account and every exit had been managed by someone else, monitored by someone else, available to someone else, at any moment, 5 words landed with the weight of everything they contained. Grant looked at the key. Good, he said. Rosa appeared in the kitchen doorway behind them. We've got a walk-in at table 3, she said. And someone outside is asking if we take reservations. We don't take reservations, Lori said, turning back toward the kitchen. First come, first served. Tell them we have a 45-minute wait. Got it. Rosa disappeared. Lori looked at Grant. I have to get back to it. I know, he said. Go. She went. She moved back through the kitchen door, and the sound of her kitchen closed around her the grill. The ventilation, Rosa, asking something from the dining room, the small efficient percussion of a kitchen finding its rhythm at the beginning of a dinner prep. Grant stood at the counter for a moment and listened to it. Then he turned and looked around the dining room that was filling up again with the early dinner crowd, 8 tables and a few counter stools and a window that faced the street and a sign outside that carried her name. All of it belonging entirely to the woman behind that door. He sat back down at the counter. He ordered pie. The pie was extraordinary. He had expected nothing less, and he ate it slowly and watched the dinner rush begin to build and watched Rosa handle the floor with the confident efficiency of a young woman learning fast. And he felt something that he rarely felt and would not have described easily if asked. But that was somewhere in the neighborhood of satisfaction, in the way that satisfaction feels when something has resolved correctly after a long time of being unresolved. At 6:30, when the dinner tables were full and the kitchen was in full operation, and Lori would not be coming out again anytime soon, Grant put money on the counter beside his plate. Rosa came to collect it and stopped. This is too much, she said. The pie was excellent, he said. The pie is $6, she said. This cook has been undercharging me for years, he said. Tell her I said so. Rosa looked at him with the slight narrowing of eyes that young women deploy when an older person is being deliberately obscure and they've decided to let it go. I'll tell her, she said. He put on his jacket. He walked to the front door and opened it and stood for a moment in the doorway. The evening air coming in from the street. The parking lot outside had a row of motorcycles in it, not organized, not summoned, just accumulated over the course of the afternoon as word moved through Spokane, the way in a city that was ultimately a collection of communities, each one networked to the next by loyalty and history and the particular information that mattered to particular people. Word had moved that the cook who had fed exhausted riders for 9 years had her own place now. So they had come. Not because Grant organized it. He hadn't. He had told one person, the man who had first told him about the empty building, after Lori mentioned it in passing, and after that it had traveled on its own through the channels that these things traveled through, which were the channels of men who paid attention to the people who fed them and who understood, in the particular way that people understand things when they've lived enough of them. That a person opening their own place after the kind of year Laurie Whitaker had been through deserved to have a full parking lot on opening day. He stood in the doorway and looked at the motorcycles and then looked back through the dining room at the kitchen door, the heavy steel door with the deadbolt on the right-hand side, behind which the sound of cooking continued without pause. He went outside. He stood beside his bike for a moment. Through the front window of Laurie's table, through the glass and the warm light and the movement of Rosa, between tables and the heads of the dinner customers bent over their food, he could see the kitchen door, just the door, closed. The cook on the other side of it working her kitchen, running her grill, making her food in her building, with her key in her apron pocket. He started his bike. The engine turned over and the other bikes in the lot responded with the slow, one-by-one ignition of men who had been waiting without being told they were waiting, who had understood without discussion that the moment the first engine started, it was time to go. Laurie heard it from inside the kitchen. She was at the grill with 3 tickets up and Rosa calling the water refill at table 2 and the biscuits ready to come out of the oven. And through all of it, she heard the engines starting in the parking lot. One, then another, then the spread of them. The particular sound of a lot full of motorcycles starting in sequence. She didn't stop what she was doing. She called out to Rosa to get the biscuits. She plated 2 of the 3 tickets. She adjusted the heat on the 3rd, and then she walked to the kitchen door and pushed it open and walked through the dining room to the front window and looked out. She could see their taillights, the long line of them pulling onto the street and heading down toward the highway, red lights disappearing one by one into the Spokane evening. She stood at the window and watched until the last one was gone. And then she stood for another moment in the stillness. After, Sandra was at the counter, refilling coffee for a regular. She looked at Laurie standing at the window and didn't say anything. The regular, a man in his 60s, who had been eating at Black Pine Tavern for years and had followed the news about Laurie's table through the community grapevine and showed up today specifically to support it, looked at the window and then back at Laurie and said, "Dan, friends of yours?" Laurie turned from the window. "Yeah," she said. "Friends of mine." She went back to the kitchen. She pushed through the door. She heard the click of it behind her, solid, certain, the particular sound of a well-fitted door in a well-built frame, and she went to the grill and picked up her spatula and looked at the ticket on the wheel and got back to work. Rosa came in for a biscuit order and went back out. Pete called from the prep station about the soup stock, and she answered him. The ventilation hummed. The grill sizzled. The dining room murmured on the other side of the door. Laurie Whitaker stood at the center of all of it and cooked, the way she had always cooked, in the particular way that only she cooked, with the full attention of a woman who understood that food made carefully and honestly was one of the few things in the world that could not be faked, could not be performed, could not be controlled by anyone except the person at the grill. That night, after the last table had paid, Rosa had gone home, and Pete had finished the closing duties, and the kitchen was clean and the grill was cold. Laurie stood in her kitchen alone. She stood in the quiet for a moment. Then she turned off the lights, one by one, the prep station, the ventilation's indicator, the hood light, until the only light left was the small one above the pass-through window, casting a warm square of light into the dark dining room on the other side. She picked up her bag. She walked to the kitchen door. She put her hand on the deadbolt. She thought about the night at Black Pine Tavern when a locked door had been the first safe thing she had been behind in years. She thought about the sound of Wade pounding on the other side of it. She thought about Grant's hands raised, empty, open, and his voice saying, "I'm not keeping you in here. I'm keeping him out." She thought about 11 pages in a manila envelope in her sister's spare bedroom in Pullman. She thought about a courtroom in January and a sentence in June. She thought about a notepad in her bag that now had a restaurant built out of it. She turned the bolt. The lock engaged with a clean, solid click. She took the key from her apron pocket and turned it in the lock and felt it catch. She held the key in her hand for a moment. Then she put it in her own pocket, picked up her own bag, and walked upstairs to her own apartment, which was directly above her own kitchen, which was inside her own building, in her own city, at the beginning of her own life, a life that no one had given her, that no one could take back, that she had found her way to herself, one decision at a time, through the longest year and the truest reckoning she had ever known. She did not check the lock twice. She did not lie awake waiting for headlights. She slept the sleep of a woman who had earned every single thing she was sleeping above. And when morning came, she got up and went downstairs and made biscuits. And the smell of them rose through the building and out into the street. And it was the best advertisement Lori's table ever had. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be rescued. Lori Whitaker spent 1 year learning the difference between being rescued and being believed, and once she knew the difference, she did the rest herself. That is not a small thing. That is everything.